Chapter 1421. Seeing Yarek suddenly appear in front of her, Alice sighed faintly as if she was worried about a friend. When will the person known as the prince get rid of the habit of breaking into other people's homes? This was not the first time Yarek had broken into Alice's home without permission. With the seraphic authority, there was almost no place that the Black Prince could not go without being discovered by anyone. That was why the Black Prince was secretly known as the most powerful monster thief in history. Ever since Yarek became enemies with her, he had broken into Alice's home without permission more than once. Fortunately, Alice had an ability called mental telepathy. This ability allowed her to eliminate distracting thoughts and focus her mind. She could slightly detect other people's aura, feelings, and even what they were thinking. She could then interfere with the source of the spirit, which was the so-called spiritual body and soul, and then manipulate them with dexterity. This was a special ability that only a very small number of witches and witches could use. Alice might not be able to read the mind of the God Slayer with this ability, but she could still sense the aura of the God Slayer by releasing her mental power. Therefore, even if Yarek broke into Alice's home, she could still clearly sense his arrival. That was why Yarek called her the best at peeping. Through the use of mental telepathy, Alice could clearly sense everything that was happening in other places, just like Noah's telepathy. The difference was that Noah could only sense hostility, malice, murderous intent, aura, or some other abnormalities. Alice, on the other hand, could completely detect everything that was happening in the place she sensed. It was as if she had seen and heard it in person. There would be no deviation. This way Alice could more or less fight against Yarek. After all, the Black Prince Yarek was a political enemy of the Wise Men's Parliament. If she fought against the God Slayer with force, she would lose in the end, no matter what the process was. As the God Slayer, Yarek could easily destroy the Wise Men's Parliament if he wanted to. Therefore, to fight against Yarek, she needed to use politics negotiation, strategy negotiation, economy, and so on. She could not just use force. Otherwise, they would definitely suffer a crushing defeat. It was because of this that Alice was able to defeat the God Slayer many times with the help of Paul Brantley, the commander of the Black Cross, Erica's uncle, who had the highest title of Paladin among humans, and was comparable to god beasts and god ancestors. As for him breaking into her house without permission every time, Alice just let him be. In any case, there was no way he could fight against Yarek by force alone. In that case, it would be better to be more magnanimous and allow the other party to enter and leave freely. This way, Alice would be able to show her calmness in the political confrontation and gain a certain advantage. Now Alice was targeting Yarek for trespassing on private property and verbally attacking him. In this regard, Yarek only gave a sarcastic remark. Since that's the case, let's set up some defenses. If the princess doesn't have any guards around her, wouldn't that be very degrading? As he said this, Yarek's gaze swept over Alice's body and narrowed his eyes. Besides, you're actually using your real body today, and you look very healthy. Have you finally found a way to get rid of your illness? You're still as outspoken as before, Alice said with an elegant smile. I just got a little help from a wise king. A wise king? Yarek's eyes flickered slightly as he stared at Alice closely. Among today's God Slayers, almost every one of them is a battle maniac who only causes trouble. As far as I know, there is only one person who can be called wise. Oh, Alice was a little surprised. How rare, Alexander. You actually admit that there is a wise person among the God Slayers other than yourself? I'm just stating facts. Compared to the others, that guy's brain is indeed better. Yarek looked directly at Alice. You, on the other hand, may be called a princess, but only I know how bad your personality is. In your opinion, the other God Slayers are probably just walking catastrophes. You actually think that one of them is wise? It's going to rain in England tomorrow. Can I take it that you're just jealous? Alice was not provoked by Yarek's provocation. She pursed her lips and smiled. At least, in my opinion, that lord is indeed much wiser than you God Slayers. Don't lump me in with the rest of them, Yarek finally blurted out. I'm not brainless like those guys who only think about solving things with their fists all day long. But if you can solve things with your fists, surely you wouldn't mind doing so? Alice poked at Yarek's sore spot. Then what's the difference between you and the other godslayers? Then what about the king you think is wise? Yarek said sarcastically. If I remember correctly, when he first came out, he fought with the Italian idiot one-on-one, and caused a loss of 15 billion euros. Later, in order to defeat the homeless old man and the powerful woman from China, he caused great damage. Can that be called wise? You're looking at things from the wrong point of view, Alexander. Alice immediately retorted. That lord has been a godslayer for almost half a year, but he has only caused this level of damage in half a year. In the past month, he hasn't caused any commotion. Compared to you people who fight to the death with the gods every few days. How wise is he? Well. Yarek was suddenly speechless and said angrily. I didn't expect that you, who have never sided with any of the godslayers, would speak for him like this. Don't tell me you like him? What? Alice's elegant demeanor instantly disappeared without a trace. Her pretty face turned red as she stood up in anger. It's not gentlemanly to casually fabricate a relationship between a lady and the opposite sex. Alexander, don't you have any manners? I just said it casually. I didn't expect you to have such a big reaction. Yarek's mouth twitched, and a rare expression of interest appeared on his face. Don't tell me that the person who is called a princess in Europe has finally fallen in love with someone? When did you become such a gossipy person? Why didn't I know that you have such a cute curiosity? Alice blushed and stared at Yarek. You didn't come to me just to talk about this, did you? What's the matter? Humph. Yarek snorted, but still got to the point. I received news that the god ancestor has left Britta, and his whereabouts are unknown. God ancestor? Lord Guinevere? Alice calmed down and asked in surprise. Why? Who knows? Yarek said directly. It's precisely because I want to know her whereabouts that I came to find you. In terms of collecting information, the Sage Parliament, which Alice belonged to, was undoubtedly more suitable than Yarek's royal factory. Princess Alice, who had the best spiritual vision and spiritual perception in Europe, was also more suitable than Yarek to do this kind of thing. That god ancestor is our common enemy, Yarek said meaningfully. I think in this regard you won't mind working with me, right? That is to say, you provide information about the enemy's departure, and I provide information about the enemy's location? Alice sighed. You're still the same as before. You're better than anyone else. Having said that, Alice started to laugh happily. Well, I haven't used my real body to travel for a long time. This time, I'll use my real body to work. Hearing that, Yarek knew what to do. It was a done deal. In addition to Guinevere, Lancelot, Yarek, Alice and the others, there was one more person who also took action. Soon these people would meet Noah, who was in the center of the chaos, and cause a big commotion. Chapter 14:22. While the rest of the people from all sides were mobilized because of the appearance of the great sage, Noah, Hui Na, and Yuli stayed in a hotel under the arrangement of Gans Han Dong Ma. More than 10 hours had passed since the great sage, Heaven's equal, had escaped. It was now nighttime. After Gans Han Dong Ma reported that the great sage had escaped, only about 30 minutes later, people from the History Compilation Committee came to the Western Heaven Palace, sealed off the scene, and began their work. Because the History Compilation Committee was an official organization, even the police force was mobilized. Therefore, a large number of police cars were now surrounding the Western Heaven Palace. They had cordoned off the entire area around the Western Heaven Palace, making it look like a murder scene. There were also a large number of police officers in uniform stationed there. The security was very tight. Of course, no matter how tight the security was, it was only for ordinary people. For those magicians and conjurers who had mastered mysterious powers, breaking through such a scene was just a piece of cake. For this reason, almost half of these police officers were conjurers in disguise. In addition, there were a large number of secret personnel hiding around to keep watch. A large number of staff members also poured into the Western Heaven Palace to treat the people who had been killed. Should it be said that it was a blessing in disguise? Sun Wukong blew the entire Western Heaven Palace away. It seemed that it was really just for show, and he did not care about the survival of human beings. Because of this, the great sage, Heaven's equal, would naturally not go after the humans. After blowing away the people in the Western Heaven Palace along with the buildings, he retreated on his own. Since the great sage only targeted the buildings and did not target the people in the Western Heaven Palace, although some of the people who had been killed were seriously injured, none of them really died and were rescued in time. In other words, the farce of the great sage was only targeted at a group of buildings. Apart from causing a lot of damage, there were no deaths or injuries. This was undoubtedly good news. Therefore, the rescue operation almost did not encounter many difficulties. It only took about 4 or 5 hours for all the people who had been killed to be rescued. Then the History Compilation Committee began to mobilize people to investigate the whereabouts of the great sage. However, it was not known whether it was a blessing or a misfortune. Until now, there was still no trace of the great sage, Heaven's equal. This also meant that other than the Western Heaven Palace, there were no other places that were affected. That was why he didn't know if this news was a blessing or a misfortune. In short, the official History Compilation Committee took on the task of finding the missing person. Noah only needed to wait for the official History Compilation Committee to find the whereabouts of the great sage, Heaven's equal, before taking down the monkey. Thus, Noah brought the 2 witches and stayed in a hotel arranged by Winter Horse Ganjin. In the hotel, Noah was thinking about how to deal with Sun Wukong while telling Yuri and Huina the details of the great sage equaling Heaven's escape. After listening to the whole process in detail, the 2 witches were stunned. So, the person who released the great saint is the king? Huey's face was full of shock and admiration. Furthermore, it was because he accidentally released the great sage because of a fight with Grandpa. The king is truly amazing. Mr. Noah. Yuli was a little angry. How can you be so impulsive? What do you mean by impulsive? Do you want me to silently bear the provocation of those 2 useless gods and Buddhas? Noah retorted. I'm sorry, I can't do it. Those 2 guys are too annoying. I didn't finish them off at the end and send them to the real Western paradise. I'm already giving them a lot of face. Well, Grandpa is really annoying sometimes. Although Huina has no memory of being angered, Mr. Ganjin and others often have headaches because of Grandpa's willfulness. Huina said generously. On the contrary, the king can actually split the curse that imprisoned the great sage with a sword. Huina is impressed. What's wrong? Noah asked curiously. Is that curse difficult to break? It's not difficult to break, but super difficult to break, Huina explained. Huina heard that if you want to break the curse that imprisoned the great sage, Heaven's equal, you must meet 3 conditions. The first condition is to make the dragon snake's divinity appear, Huina said. Because the great sage is the god of steel, the sword god born to conquer the dragon snake. Therefore, the dragon snake's blood and divine power can stimulate his power and remind him of his tyrannical nature. The second condition is to have a treasured sword with a weakened seal, Huina said with assurance. It is said that if you want to break the curse of Lord Ape and borrow the power of Lord Ape, you have to let Witch Yuan, who can weaken the seal, worship him. Witch Yuan's power alone is not enough. She needs to cooperate with the treasured sword that also has the power to weaken the seal. The treasured sword is kept by the Jiufazhong family. And the third condition is to let Witch Yuan, who has the ability of a calamity, hold the treasured sword and use her spiritual power to cut the seal, Huina said to Noah. That's the ability to erase or restore the power of curses, spells, magic, and other mysterious things that shouldn't exist in this world. However, it has very little effect on the power of the god and the god slayer. Witch Yuan, who can worship the god lord, must have this ability to use the treasured blade, weaken the seal, and borrow the power of the god lord. It was precisely because of such a rare ability that the Jiufazhong family had not been able to find Witch Yuan with this ability for nearly 100 years to worship the great sage, Heaven's equal. It was also because the conditions for unlocking the seal were so complicated that only when the dragon snake appeared could the great sage, Heaven's equal, temporarily escape and come out to slay the dragon snake. However, according to Grandpa, even if the seal is unlocked, the curse will still recover after a while and seal the great sage, Heaven's equal, back to the West Heaven Palace. Huina tried hard to recall the information she heard from Susanoo. Such a curse that can even imprison the god of disobedience and manipulate him to a certain extent. It is said that the elders of Ushur exhausted their efforts and spent nearly a lifetime to complete it. Anyone who wants to lift this curse must follow the lifting method. Hui Na looked at Noah with admiration. As a result, the king actually violently lifted the entire curse at once. It's amazing. Hearing this, Noah couldn't help but laugh dryly. Noah didn't know that the curse that imprisoned the great sage, Heaven's Equal, was so complicated and powerful. Gathering the wisdom of the elders of secluded world, it took the equivalent of a lifetime to complete the great curse. No wonder it could imprison the god of disobedience and control him to a certain extent. Unfortunately, no matter how powerful the curse was, in the end, it was just a barrier and seal that formed a cage. In the face of the power that could cut the world and open the world, there was no reason why any barrier and seal could not be broken. It was precisely because the curse that imprisoned the great sage, Heaven's Equal, was a barrier that the noble phantasm named Good Parting Sordier could cut it off. After all, Good Parting Sordier was originally a noble phantasm. It's just that I didn't expect that even Tian Songyan was destroyed. Yoli looked at Hui Na, hesitated, and said softly, Hui Na, this shouldn't affect you, right? It's okay. Hui Na waved her hand casually. Although without the divine blade, I will definitely lose a part of my strength, but I can still use the invite God to descend technique and borrow Grandpa's power. Even if I can't compete with God, I won't lose to anyone else. Indeed, even without Tian Songyan, Hui Na's invite God to descend technique could still obtain the same power as the god ancestor and mythological beast. This was the real violation of the rules of the head of the Witch Yuan. Of course, just as she said, no matter how much she violated the rules, she couldn't be compared to God and the God Slayer. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Noah, Yoli, and Hui Na cast their gazes over at the same time. They saw Winter Horse Gontai open the door and walked in from outside the door. As soon as he came in, Winter Horse Gontai said such a sentence. King, I'm afraid you don't have to deal with the great sage Heaven's Equal. Such a sentence made Noah completely stunned. Chapter 14:23. In the dark night, the soft moonlight slanted downwards, illuminating the entire bustling city. A cold wind with a slight chill blew past, causing the clear whistling sound of the wind to reverberate in the surroundings. It did not subside for a long time. On top of a tall building in such a city, a young man suddenly flew over like a bird. In the blink of an eye, he landed on the roof of the tall building. His body bent slightly, and his knees bent slightly. The force of his fall was completely neutralized, and he straightened his back. It was a young man of about 14 or 15 years old, wearing a black shirt and jeans of the same color. With light steps, the young man nimbly leaped onto the railing of the building. As if he was weightless, he stood upright on the railing, looking down and muttering. The place where the great sage appeared is probably around here, right? Taking a closer look, in the direction where the young man was looking, there was a messy area that had turned into ruins. The area around the ruins was completely cordoned off by a police cordon. Police officers and police cars were also surrounding the area, guarding the area like it was heavily guarded. That was naturally the Western Heaven Palace, which originally worshipped the great sage, Heaven's Equal, as the ape god. The young man looked in the direction of the Western Heaven Palace and sighed as if he found it troublesome. Although it's very easy to break in, it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, the great sage is definitely not there. Master only asked me to find the great sage. It's useless to come here. Although he said that, the young man's eyes were quite sharp as they swept across the ruins of the Western Heaven Palace. The traces of the collapse of the rubble are still very clear. Although some of it has been cleaned up, it should be a measure taken for the rescue. Looking at it this way, the rubble was created about a dozen hours ago, which is not much different from the information we received. Then, the young man seemed to have felt something. He turned his head and looked in one direction. There is a huge amount of curse power residue here. I'm afraid that the great sage should have left in this direction. It had to be said that the young man's observation skills were really outstanding. However, for magicians and conjurers who had mastered the mysteries, This level of tracking could be completed in an instant with a small magic trick or curse. They did not need to spend much effort to carefully observe the surrounding movements. Unfortunately, the young man had to go through this kind of observation to come to the same conclusion. Because although the young man was very famous in the magic world, he was a complete layman when it came to spells. If the youth were to fight, in this world, the number of people who could claim to be able to defeat him in a one-on-one battle would not exceed 10. Of course, that was under the condition that the God Slayer and the God of Disobedience were not taken into account. However, if the young man were to do the delicate work of tracking, it would only make things more efficient. The youth himself was very clear about this. However, there was nothing the youth could do. After all, it's master's orders, the young man grumbled. Even though he knew that it would waste a lot of time for me to do it, master still completely ignored it. It would be better to say that when the young man spoke frankly about this matter, not only did the master he spoke of not pay any attention to him, he even berated him. The relationship between master and disciple is like that of a mother and son. As your guide on the path of martial arts, I am about to step into someone else's territory. As my disciple, not only did you not have any thoughts of exploring the path for your master, you even shirked away like this. How can you achieve great things in the future? Saying this, the young man's master directly sent him flying. No matter how many people there were, as long as they knew the details, they would definitely cry for the young man's grievances and feel resentful for the master's rudeness. However, to the young man, this kind of thing had long become a common occurrence. His master's rudeness was natural. This was because no matter how rudeness he was, everyone in this world could only silently endure it. No one could resist. No one could object to his master's rudeness. This was because even if the whole world condemned this rudeness, the young man's master could use his own strength to suppress everyone's voices. As long as his master was willing, he could completely destroy the whole world of humans by himself. As long as his master was willing, he could destroy 1 or 2 territories on the world map by himself. With such a powerful person, no matter how rudeness he was, it was imaginable. Under such circumstances, just a little bit of violence and a little bit of extreme way of teaching his disciple was already considered a blessing to the whole world. The young man grew up in such an environment. It was precisely because of this that the young man could grow into a person that the magicians and cursemancers of the world could not underestimate at this age. Forget it, for the time being, I've arranged for people to come over and search. The young man scratched his head. I've also talked to the gang that secretly controls this country in advance. I think it's called the Official History Compilation Committee. Presumably, they won't disobey my master's orders, right? Just as these words were spoken, a voice suddenly rang out. That's not necessarily true. The sudden voice made the young man's entire body tense up in an instant, and a surge of curse power surged out of his body. At this time, the young man only had one thought in his mind. How could he not notice the presence of someone who was so close to him? The person who came was definitely not simple. With this thought in mind, the young man jumped up and jumped over the fence like a bird. He flipped in the air and landed on the rooftop of the building, facing the source of the voice. Then, the young man raised his head and looked in front of him. There, without him knowing when 3 people appeared there. One was a young girl wearing a witch costume with a trace of determination and worry on her face. She looked like a weak princess who worried about the country and the people. Another was a young girl wearing a uniform with a graceful figure. Her beautiful black waist-length hair swayed in the wind, and her body exuded the elegant and natural temperament of Yamato Nadeshiko. The last one was a young man with black hair and black eyes, wearing an ordinary black shirt and black pants, and a pitch-black coat. The young man did not notice the 3 people in front of him until the moment the voice sounded. When the voice sounded, the young man immediately noticed the presence of the 2 young girls. However, the young man's presence was so close to the young man that the young man did not notice at all. After observing the posture of the 2 young girls, the young man made a judgment. The witch who was like a weak princess had no achievements in martial arts. It was impossible for her to hide from his senses and suddenly appear here. The young girl who was like Yamato Nadeshiko was very unusual. She was not weaker than him, but it was impossible for her to not be noticed by the young man when she was so close to him. Then there was only one explanation left. The two young girls were brought here by the unfathomable young man. He did not know the origin of the other party, but it was definitely not simple. For the time being, he should test the situation first. The young man who made these judgments in a short moment had a face that was neither respectful nor arrogant. He was quite casual and neither servile nor overbearing. He cupped his fist and saluted. "I don't know how to address you." The two young girls did not speak, but glanced at the young man vaguely. Obviously, the young man was the center of the three. The young man was naturally Noah. It was Noah who took Yoli and Huina, tore open the teleportation magic scroll, and instantly teleported to this building. "You are Luing Hua, right?" Noah looked at the young man with interest. The personal disciple of sect leader Luo Hao, the young master of the Lu family in Hong Kong, China, who is famous for his excellent lightness skill and great palm strength. "I didn't expect you to be so young." Yes. The young man in front of him was the personal disciple of Luo Hao, the leader of the martial arts world of China, who commanded the world with the title of Wuxia King. In other words, this 14 or 15-year-old young man was a genius who was apprenticed to a god slayer. Moreover, he was the disciple of Luo Hao, who was famous for his excellent martial arts skills, and was well known throughout the world. He was a senior among the god slayers, and only Warban could match him. The reason why Kanekiri said, "I'm afraid you don't have to deal with it," was because of the arrival of this personal disciple of the god slayer. "I heard that sect leader Luo Hao plans to come to Japan personally to fight the great sage, Heaven's equal." Noah looked at the young man named Luing Hua. This shouldn't be just a casual remark, right? Chapter 14:24. Just 10 minutes ago, Ganqi Dongma brought the news of Luo Hao's plan to come to Japan and fight with the great sage to Noah. He also said that sect leader Luo Hao had ordered the people of the History Compilation Committee not to interfere. Not only that, Luo Hao had also sent his personal disciple here to search for the whereabouts of the great sage. After receiving this news, the upper echelons of the History Compilation Committee asked Ganqi Dongma to bring this news to Noah and let Noah make a decision. Luing Hua was right. The History Compilation Committee did not dare to disobey the orders of sect leader Luo Hao. Therefore, Luing Hua thought that the people of the History Compilation Committee should obediently listen to Luo Hao's orders and not interfere in this matter. However, there was an accident here. There was another king in this island. It was because of the order of this king that the History Compilation Committee began to search for the whereabouts of the great sage. Now Luo Hao's order undoubtedly had a fierce conflict with Noah's order. As a result, the History Compilation Committee, which no one dared to offend, did not obediently stop work as Luing Hua expected. Instead, they asked Ganqi Dongma to report this matter to Noah and let Noah make a decision. After learning this matter, Noah was surprised. Although Noah had only met Luo Hao once, he still understood the actions of the Wuxia King. Although this Wuxia King could command the world, she followed the style of China women. She lived in Mount Lu and did not like to show her face in public. If an ordinary person saw her face and heard her voice, Luo Hao would cruelly cut off the other party's tongue and destroy the other party's ears. She was a real tyrant. Why would such a person suddenly travel to Japan for the great sage, Heaven's equal, and even order the History Compilation Committee not to interfere? With this question in mind, Noah asked Ganqi Dongma. Unfortunately, Ganqi Dongma also did not know. Therefore, Noah had the idea of finding Luing Hua, who had the ability to be accepted as a disciple by Luo Hao. Then, just as Noah was about to search for Luing Hua's whereabouts, Ganzhan Dongma received the news. Luing Hua arrived at the Western Heaven Palace. After all, the official History Compilation Committee had already placed spies around the Western Heaven Palace. Luing Hua ran over without any concealment. Naturally, he was discovered immediately. Therefore, Noah tore open a teleportation magic scroll on the spot, took Yoli and Huina, and instantly teleported to the building where Luing Hua was. Sect Master Luo Hao doesn't like to show himself in public, right? Noah pursed his lips. Why would you suddenly come here to fight the great sage, Heaven's equal? As a disciple, I don't dare to guess Master's intentions. Lu Yinghua said with a fake smile. However, according to Master, the god of disobedience is undoubtedly a great hero of China, but he was raised by the Neon people. It is really an unforgivable crime. Knowing the existence of such a guy and leaving him alone would damage his reputation. Therefore, since a long time ago, Master has been waiting for the time to come to condemn the great sage, heaven's equal. Ha! Yoli was stunned and said with some uncertainty. Just because of this reason? Just because of this reason. Lu Yinghua shrugged, but there was no warmth in his eyes when he looked at Yuli. What? Does this sister have a problem with it? Yoli's heart tightened when she was stared at by Lu Yinghua's cold eyes. At this time, Yoli remembered the advice Gans Handongma gave before leaving. If Miss Yoli and Miss Huina also plan to see Lu Yinghua, then it's best to be careful. That wuxia is said to have been disciplined very strictly by sect leader Luo Hao since he was a child. He was even disciplined to the point of violence at the slightest provocation. As a result, he developed misogyny and is particularly hostile to beautiful and capable women. It's best not to have a conflict with him, otherwise he will never show mercy. In view of this, Yoli seemed to have succeeded in arousing Lu Yinghua's disgust. After all, Yoli's appearance was quite outstanding, wasn't it? On the contrary, after listening to Lu Yinghua's explanation, Huina couldn't help but smile bitterly with a dumbfounded expression. It's amazing, because it's too amazing, Huina doesn't know what to say. Obviously, Luo Hao's willful and unscrupulous behavior had reached the point where even Yoli, who had been cultivating in the mountains since he was a child, was speechless. Only Noah sighed as if he had a headache. I see, it's indeed what the sect leader would say. In the past, Luo Hao went directly to Italy to find trouble with Noah, because of a small provocation from Athena. At that time, Noah had fully understood how serious Luo Hao's willful and unscrupulous behavior was. However, this wuxia king of China was extremely narcissistic, and thought that everyone in the world was inferior to him. Even if they were both godslayers, he treated them as juniors and did not care about them at all. He only saw Warban as his enemy. As a result, after being defeated by Noah in Italy, the wuxia king simply admitted defeat, which indeed reflected the generosity and straightforwardness of Chinese wuxia, which changed Noah's impression of him a lot. Now it seemed that even if he had no shortcomings as a wuxia king, as a king, the sect leader was a problematic child who gave people a headache. He was more troublesome than the 16 Knights of Reverse Time, the Distant Flying Bird, and Haruhito Hikari. Might as well let Luo Hao deal with the great sage, heaven's equal. That's not a bad choice. Noah's soliloquy made Lu Yinghua's heart move, and he asked Noah whether intentionally or unintentionally. Your Excellency seems to be quite familiar with my master, may I ask? Forget about asking. I'm not as ostentatious as your master, Noah said to Lu Yinghua in a bad mood. Just tell your master directly that if she wants the head of the great sage, heaven's equal, I can give it to her, but she better not cause any more trouble. Otherwise this time, it won't be a simple fight. After saying this, Noah shook out a scroll, and a dazzling light covered the three of them, and they disappeared. Only Lu Yinghua was left, and he stared blankly at the place where Noah, Yuri, and Keita disappeared, and did not recover for a long time. In fact, Lu Yinghua was also a proud person. How could Lu Yinghua not be proud to be accepted as a direct disciple by the wuxia king of China, and have the strength to stand at the top of the human race before the age of 15? If someone else had spoken to Lu Yinghua like this, he would definitely not have let it go. However, at this time, Lu Yinghua did not even have the slightest bit of anger, and he began to ponder alone. This time, it's not going to be a simple fight? This sentence revealed a lot of information. This was because only a godslayer could fight with a godslayer. Among the current godslayers, Warban was an old man, Madame Aisha was a woman, and Lu Yinghua knew the physical characteristics of Yarek, Smith, and Tony. After excluding the above 5 people, there was only one godslayer left, right? Moreover, that person had indeed fought with Luo Hao, and had even defeated his master, who was almost invincible in Lu Yinghua's eyes. Thinking of this, Lu Yinghua couldn't help but recall the first sentence that Luo Hao had said to him a few months ago when he suddenly left Lushan Mountain and went to Italy. After that, he suddenly returned without any warning. I didn't expect that Luo would have a taste of defeat. Noah Dole is indeed a strong enemy. Noah Dole? Lu Yinghua's expression changed slightly. Could he be the Godslayer who defeated Master? This was the only way to connect all the clues. This is troublesome. Lu Yinghua's brows furrowed deeply. I didn't expect that Godslayer to be in this country. It seems that I'll have to take a few heavy blows from Master and ask her to come out in advance. At this time, Lu Yinghua still did not know. This decision caused Luo Hao to completely step onto a path of no return, and the trajectory of her entire life had been changed. On the other side, Yoli, who had teleported back to the hotel, spoke to Noah with some concern. Mr. Noah, are you really going to give the great sage heavens equal to sect leader Luo Hao? If someone is in charge of solving the problem, why not? Noah sighed. Although I have an ominous premonition, that's right. Chapter 1425. The next day. As soon as he got up, Noah received a call from Erica. The god of disobedience appeared on your side? When Noah picked up the phone, Erica's first sentence was this. What's wrong? Noah sighed. Even Italy has received the information? After all, it's information about the god of disobedience, which has always been the most important information for magic societies. If it's a relatively weak divine spark, it's fine, but the god that appeared this time seems to be unusual, right? Erica said meaningfully. And since even I have received the news, the other people who need to pay attention to must have received the same news, such as the Black Prince and the god ancestor, who have been looking for you recently. That's true. Noah scratched his cheek. When they come to this island, the news that I'm here should be immediately exposed, right? The god of disobedience that appeared this time was a member of Steel. Since it was Steel, Guinevere, who had been looking for the strongest Steel, would certainly not let go of this opportunity. Even if it crossed the ocean, it would still come to this island country. And where Guinevere would appear, the Black Prince as its enemy would also appear. However, both of them regarded Noah as their enemy to some extent, and both intended to seize the magic sacred weapon called Holy Grail from Noah's hands. If they encountered Guinevere and Yarek, there would be all kinds of conflicts. In addition, with the upcoming arrival of Luo Hao, a group of powerful people were all gathered in this small island country. It would be strange if nothing happened. Not to mention that Guinevere was protected by Lancelot, and the great sage was currently missing. The situation was becoming more and more chaotic. I knew it. The person who is known as the strongest Godslayer would not be too peaceful around him. Otherwise, he would not have defeated the King of Swords of Italy as soon as he made his debut, and at the same time defeated 3 of his kind, including the King of Swords, Erica murmured. I'm really curious, where have you been hiding in the past month to be able to remain calm? You didn't call just to make sarcastic remarks, did you? Noah said with some dissatisfaction. If that's the case, I'm hanging up. You really don't know what's good for you. Erica was also displeased. Even if it's just sarcasm, there are plenty of people in Italy who want to talk to me, Erica Brantley on the phone. You're not satisfied with my preference. You're still as narcissistic as ever. Fortunately, someone even more narcissistic is coming here soon. Otherwise, I would feel embarrassed for you. Noah rolled his eyes. Don't tell me you're calling just to make sarcastic remarks. I just want to confirm the situation on your side, Erica said. If Steel really appears on your side, the god ancestor is likely to be attracted to you. Once the god ancestor goes over, the Black Prince will definitely follow. I'm afraid you won't be able to hide your whereabouts. Since that's the case, Lily and I don't need to care about the surveillance around us anymore. We can go to your side openly. The reason why Erica and Liliana didn't come to Noah's side was that they didn't want to expose Noah's whereabouts to Yarek because of the surveillance of the royal factory. Now, since Noah's whereabouts could be exposed at any time, there was no need to continue hiding it. Is that okay? Noah asked. If you come to my place, it's very likely that you'll have to go against Yarek. In that case, the positions of the Copper Black Cross, the Bronze Black Cross, and the Royal Factory should become complicated, right? It's not a good thing to make an enemy of a god-slayer. Don't worry. The magic associations in Italy are nominally led by Salvatore. With the Black Prince's personality, he won't make enemies for no reason, Erica said with a smile. Besides, ever since she heard about you, Lily has been clamoring to go to your place. I think it's almost time for her to make trouble. It's time for her to return to your side. Otherwise, she'll really go berserk. Noah was speechless for a moment. However, what Erica said was not necessarily wrong. With Liliana's straightforward and upright personality, it was absolutely impossible for her to stand watching the king she served fight alone in a foreign country while she hid at home and waited for news, right? That knight should have been eager to rush to Noah's side and fight the enemy for Noah. If it weren't for the fact that the person suppressing Liliana was Erica, who had been controlling Liliana since she was a child, Liliana would have rushed to Nippon at all costs. Thinking of the knight who used to take care of his daily life, Noah didn't know whether to laugh or cry. At the same time, he couldn't help but miss the knight. In that case, come here quickly. Yes, my lord. Erica put away her teasing smile and said in a respectful tone. My king. Not long after the call with Erica ended, Yoli came to Noah's room with breakfast. The breakfast was not made by Yoli, but by the staff in the hotel. This hotel was not far from the Western Heaven Palace. Therefore, the History Compilation Committee had sent a group of the best chefs here to prepare the best meals for the Devil King, so as not to offend Noah. However, due to Noah's identity, the people of the History Compilation Committee were in excessive awe of Noah, so they could only ask Yuli to deliver the food on their behalf. In view of this, Noah simply asked Yuli to come over and eat with him, so as to avoid running up and down. As for Hui Na, as Noah's attendant, the girl joined in casually and ate with Noah and Yuli. During the meal, Noah mentioned Erica and Liliana. The king's own attendant is going to come here? Hui Na raised her head from the bowl in her hand in surprise and looked at Noah. In other words, the king doesn't need me anymore? Your words are full of ambiguity. Noah smiled embarrassedly. That's true, but Hui Na, in addition to your work as an attendant, you should also have a double duty of surveillance, right? Surveillance. It was Yoli's turn to look at Hui Na in surprise. Hui Na is monitoring Mr. Noah? Was it really discovered? Hui Na smiled embarrassedly. The people of the committee did tell Hui Na that if they find that the king is planning to do something terrible, she must report it to them. This should be considered surveillance, right? Is that so? Yoli looked at Noah evasively. Did Mr. Noah know that he would be monitored like this from the beginning? After all, it's not the first time I've been wandering in a foreign country as a god-slayer. It's not reasonable for the existence known as the Devil King to not be monitored at all times, right? Noah said rather open-mindedly. Erica and Liliana, who I just mentioned, became my attendants at the beginning with this purpose. At the beginning? Hui Na asked curiously. What happened after that? After that, Noah recalled the days of traveling with Erica and Liliana in the past few months, and couldn't help but smile. After that, we regarded each other as indispensable partners. It was precisely because of this that Erica sincerely called Noah her king, and Liliana unknowingly began to consider herself as Noah's knight. Everything was so natural. Under the circumstances of letting nature take its course, Erica and Liliana no longer used surveillance as their purpose. Instead, they sincerely enjoyed traveling with Noah. Now, the two Italian prodigies had long been recognized as the trusted aides of the seventh king. Even the copper Black Cross and bronze Black Cross no longer asked about Erica and Liliana. The king's companions and attendants? Hui Na tilted her head and smiled sweetly. I wonder if they're powerful? At this moment, the expression on Hui Na's face was that of a warrior who was overjoyed and delighted as if she had met a competitor. Unfortunately, Noah didn't see this expression, nor did he expect that his attendants would start a fight over this. Just like that, the three of them chatted while having their meal in harmony. At this moment, the figure of the winter horse appeared outside the door. As soon as he appeared, the winter horse said directly, We've found the great sage, heaven's equal, and the situation isn't good. Chapter 14:26. On the edge of the bustling city, there was a mountain. Although it wasn't a towering mountain, it was still a rather majestic deep mountain. It was covered by dense forests and bright sunlight, looking full of vitality. However, at this time, such a deep mountain was fluctuating with a power that was difficult to see with the naked eye. In the tremor of the air, a strong spell surged from the deep mountain and reverberated in all directions, making people's vision seem to be distorted. They only felt that the whole deep mountain was trembling. In front of such a deep mountain, at a certain moment, a darkness suddenly emerged like fog and gathered into the shape of a door. 3 figures walked out of it and came to the front of the deep mountain. Hui Na frowned slightly and seemed to be a little uncomfortable. What a huge spell! Even Hui Na feels a little uncomfortable. Since Hui Na, who could use the technique of invite God to descend, with the help of the gods, felt uncomfortable, Yu Li, who was only at the level of an ordinary conjurer, naturally found it even more difficult to endure the invasion of the huge spell. However, just like Noah's previous experiment with the strengthening effect of the dragon's sun sovereignty, although the spell was huge, it was not targeted, just slightly increasing the spell in the body. Yu Li and Hui Na's complexion were restored to normal. Then Yu Li, who had been staring in the direction of the deep mountain, suddenly trembled and flashed with a dim light. The Monkey King that was born from the stone can naturally gain vitality from the stone. The so-called steel hero is also the natural enemy of goddess Gaia, so he can extract essence from the earth. This will be the precursor to the recovery of China's ape god, and he will once again reign. Looking at Yu Li suddenly muttering absent-mindedly, Noah and Hui Na both became spirited. This is spirit vision ? Hui Na said with some surprise. Yu Li triggered spirit vision ? Under Hui Na's surprised voice, the brilliant light in Yu Li's eyes began to dissipate. I know. Yu Li could not help but raise his voice a little. The great sage is burying himself in the mountain and becoming one with the rocks. He obtains vitality from the rocks and the earth to heal his injuries. It was just like what Yu Li had seen with his spirit vision. As the Monkey King that was born from the stone, the great sage, heaven's equals life was obtained from the stone. Naturally, he could obtain life force from the stone as well. Furthermore, the god of steel was the natural enemy of the Gaia goddess, so he could more or less extract some of the earth's essence and convert it into life force. With the help of these 2 factors, the great sage, heaven's equals injuries were recovering at an extremely fast rate. However, this kind of behavior was ultimately just a form of exploitation. Following the great sage, heaven's equals extraction, the originally lush forest in the depths of the mountains started to wither bit by bit. The ground also started to crack as it lost its own life. At this rate, in less than a day, the entire mountain would be turned into a wasteland, right? Of course, the prerequisite was that the great sage, heaven's equal, had not recovered from his injuries and continued to drain the mountain of his life force. And if even the mountain of life force was unable to heal Excellency Ape's injuries, the great sage, heaven's equal, would definitely not mind continuing to extract the mountain of life force until all the earth's essence in Japan was exhausted. Although the people in the History Compilation Committee believed that the great sage, heaven's equal's injuries did not need to go to that extent to recover, at the same time, it was uncertain whether the mountain of life could be appeased. Therefore, at the very least, the city was still in danger. No one knew when the mountain of life force would be completely extracted, and it would be the city's turn to be extracted. It was precisely because of this that the winter horse was so anxious. Noah could only come here to take a look. The situation is indeed not optimistic. Noah stared at the gradually withered trees in the depths of the mountains, and was speechless. Your Excellency, if you want to fight with the monkey, then hurry up and come over. Why are you late? King, what should we do now? Hui Na asked. If there is a need to fight, Hui Na should be able to help a little. Hui Na took down the cloth bag from her shoulder as she said that. The weapon in the bag was not the Sky Cluster Cloud Sword. It was a weapon that Hui Na had asked the Autumn Yard to send over overnight. Although it was not as good as the Sky Cluster Cloud Sword, it was still a famous sword that was hard to come by. With Hui Na's invite God to descend, she could even fight a divine beast to the end. Let's get ready for the battle first. Noah turned his head and looked at Yu Li. Wanli Gu, You can go back first. Leave this to us. Unlike Huina, Yuli was just an ordinary conjurer. If they wanted to obtain any information, they would need Yuli's ability. However, Yuli would not be of much use in a head-on battle. Therefore, it was wise to let Yuli stay away from this dangerous area. Otherwise, Noah was not confident that he could protect Yuli from the god of disobedience since he could not use his authority. Yuli naturally understood this, so he nodded without hesitation. I understand. I wish both of you good luck. Yuli bowed deeply as soon as he finished speaking. He then turned around and walked into the darkness that looked like a door. It was the magic door called the dimensional portal. When Yuli's figure disappeared into the darkness wriggled and disappeared. Huina. Noah then turned around and faced the direction of the mountains again. Let's go. Yes, King. Huina nodded without hesitation. However, just when the both of them were about to enter the mountains, a voice was suddenly heard. Both of you, please wait for a moment. As the voice was heard, a silhouette flew out of the mountains like a bird. It drew a perfect parabola and landed in front of Noah and Huina. Noah and Huina stopped at the same time. It's you? Noah frowned. Luinghua? That's me. Luinghua clasped his fists and bowed solemnly to Noah. Honorable Master Noah, Luinghua is here to offer you the highest respect. I wish you to live as long as the heavens and never be destroyed. I wish you eternal glory and glory. The whole place was suddenly silent. Huina blinked and looked like she didn't understand the situation at all. The corners of Noah's mouth twitched, and he felt like he was being cheated. What are you doing? What's wrong? Luinghua raised his head with some doubts. Is there anything strange about Luinghua's etiquette? There seems to be, but there doesn't seem to be. Noah said, extremely uncomfortable. Why are you bowing to me with such a tone and grammar? Isn't that natural? Luinghua said. Master Noah is the unparalleled king of God-slayers. Don't you deserve this etiquette? Let's not talk about whether I deserve it or not. Noah's eyelids twitched. In any case, is there a need to bow so solemnly? I'm sorry. Because of Master's teachings, I have to pay my respects to the God-slayers. Luinghua looked bitter. If Master knows that I don't respect someone like him, I will definitely face all kinds of near-death experiences. Noah was suddenly speechless. So that was the case. This child was also a victim. Noah could only collect his emotions and look at Luinghua. Since you're here, that means that sect leader Luohao is also here, right? Yes. Luinghua answered honestly. Master has already entered the mountain and is preparing to blow the entire mountain away. What? Noah was dumbfounded. Why? According to Master, since the great sage has already merged with the mountain, then it's fine to just blow the mountain away, Luinghua said. In that case, the great sage will naturally appear. Just because of that? Just because of this reason he was preparing to blow the entire mountain away? How little common sense did one have to be to do this? Not to mention Noah. Even Huina was speechless. By the way, Master also said. At this time, Luinghua raised a hand and curled it slightly like a fist, letting a trace of curse power curl around it. His gaze was fixed on Huina, containing extreme indifference and bigotry. It's natural and reasonable for the king to meet with the king. However, those who are not the king had better know their place. If you insist on stepping into the king's territory and offend the king, then Inghua will teach you a lesson on your behalf. Chapter 14:27. Following Luinghua's emotionless words, Noah and Huina both narrowed their eyes. The former was more or less angry because of Luohao's words. The latter was more or less angry because of Luinghua's performance. Putting Huina aside, Noah felt that since Luohao had arrived, the trouble of the great sage, heaven's equal, should be left to the leader to deal with. There was no need for him to get involved. Although the person who released the great sage, heaven's equal, was Noah, and Noah was also responsible for dealing with the great sage, it was just a battle. If someone was willing to take it on, then Noah didn't need to look for trouble. If no one was willing to take it on, and only Noah could do it, then Noah wouldn't mind doing it himself. Noah had such a mentality. However, It turned out that Noah didn't seem to be able to be a hands-off boss. It was just like the ominous premonition last night. Compared to the great sage, heaven's equal, Luo Hao was undoubtedly a super big trouble. Judging from Luo Hao's declaration of destroying the entire mountain in order to dig the great sage, heaven's equal out of the mountain, she probably wouldn't mind dragging the surrounding cities into the battle to get rid of the great sage. Heaven's equal, right? Furthermore, the great sage, heaven's equal, wasn't someone who would consider whether or not he would affect others during the battle. Once the two of them clashed, there was a real possibility that this city would be wiped off the map. In the end, a prisoner he accidentally released killed so many ordinary people. Noah wouldn't even be able to sleep well. Sure enough, it was a huge mistake to let Luo Hao, who has lost her personality, deal with this matter. The anger in Noah's heart was successfully aroused. If I don't teach you a lesson, you'll really think that you're the only one in the world, crazy woman. At this moment, Huina spoke at the right time. Then King, you should go to leader Luo Hao first. Hearing this, Noah took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. He glanced at Lu Yinghua and then looked at Huina. Then I'll leave this place to you. Can you handle it? In terms of age, Lu Yinghua seemed to be younger than Huina. However, Noah sensed a strong aura from this young martial artist. Her aura was probably much stronger than Erica's and Liliana's. No matter what, he was the direct disciple of the God Slayer, whose martial arts were unparalleled in the world. His strength could not be judged by his appearance and age. The only person who could win against Lu Yinghua was probably Paul Brantley, an existence at the pinnacle of humanity's holy night. Even in Europe, the birthplace of magic, there were only a few people of this level. There were no more than 10 of them. Even if the entire world was included, not counting those transcendental existences like the monks and princesses in the secluded world, there would probably not be more than 10 of them. Although Huina could use the God's Descent technique to borrow the power of the gods, she did not know if she could win against Lu Yinghua without Tian Songyan. If she could not win, with Lu Yinghua's extreme dislike of women, he would not show mercy, right? Perhaps she had guessed Noah's thoughts. Huina pursed her lips and smiled. That smile was neither elegant nor coarse. It was the smile of a wild warrior. Don't worry about me, King. Huina has always been cultivating in the mountains. I haven't met an opponent in this country for a long time. Huina actually wants to have a good fight. Is that so? Noah caught the hint of eagerness in Huina's eyes. He did not object and directly nodded. Then I'll leave this place to you. After saying this, Noah no longer hesitated. He directly turned into a stream of light and rushed into the mountains. At the scene, only the two prodigies from China and Japan were left standing at the peak of their respective countries. Lu Yinghua, who had been quietly watching Noah leave, turned his gaze to Huina at this time. I didn't think that sister would actually let King leave and stay behind to deal with me alone. Should I say that she is brave but not resourceful? At this time, a paranoid smile appeared on Lu Yinghua's face. It was a smile that only appeared when he had all the emotions of self-confidence, arrogance, disdain, and condescension. In front of the king, the Chinese wuxia was respectful. When facing others, or rather facing women, the arrogance and disdain that came from the bottom of his heart was completely revealed. This kind of natural provocation and arrogance, should it really be said that like teacher, like disciple? Unfortunately, the person facing this proud and arrogant child was not someone who was good at observing people's expressions. Instead, it was someone who grew up in the mountains, naive, romantic, and without scheming. Even though Huina had been taught proper etiquette by the Qingqiu courtyard, causing her every movement to exude the elegance of a Yamato Nadeshiko, this kind of temperament was only naturally exuded from her every movement. It had already merged into Huina's subconscious. In essence, Huina was still a carefree wild child. It's been a long time since Huina met an opponent who can be so confident in a one-on-one fight with me. Huina revealed a fearless smile as she untied the knife pouch on her shoulder. She opened the pouch and looked directly at Lu Yinghua, her eyes full of bright expression. Do you think you can win against Huina? It's not that I haven't heard of sister's name before. She is the chief witch of Japan's spell world, a genius of spirit summoning, a person who can use the God's Descent technique. She is very difficult to deal with. Lu Yinghua said this with a somewhat cunning and treacherous smile. Even if it is me, it is still very dangerous to fight with an opponent who can borrow the power of God. If I don't use all my skills, I probably can't defeat sister, right? In other words, as long as you use all your skills, you can win against Huina, right? The fearless smile on Huina's pretty face became more intense. She raised her hand, let a section of the knife handle out of the cloth bag, and held it tightly. Then don't let Huina down. Don't worry, I am definitely not the type to show mercy to women. Lu Yinghua sneered aloud. No, it should be said that because the opponent is a woman, I will not show mercy. Be prepared. The battle between the two countries' most outstanding geniuses was about to start. On the other side, Noah, who flew directly into the mountains, arrived at the top of the mountain in just a few seconds and descended. It was unknown if the god who had merged with the mountain felt Noah's arrival, but the entire space on the top of the mountain suddenly trembled, and a more violent fluctuation of curse power surged out. Looking up, it was as if the entire top of the mountain was steaming, making the field of vision appear to be in a distorted state. On such a distorted top of the mountain, there was a beautiful figure standing with the distorted top of the mountain as the background, with her back facing Noah. Long time no see, Rakshasa king of a foreign country. With such a sweet and light voice, the peerless beauty slowly turned around and faced Noah. An extremely majestic smile appeared on her face, which was sweeter and more lovely than anyone else's. It has been less than half a year, and you and I can meet so quickly. It seems that we are quite fated. I don't know if we are fated. Noah raised his eyes and met the girl's gaze. All I know is that you've made the already troublesome matter even more troublesome. I believe that you'll be able to solve this matter. I'm just like an idiot. Are you insulting me? The sweet and lovely smile on Luo Hao's face suddenly disappeared slowly. Her beautiful eyebrows frowned slightly, and she stared at Noah. I, Luo Tsuelian, have indeed been defeated by you, but Rakshasa king of a foreign country, you have to know that even so, I am still the unparalleled leader of Wulin in the world. I will not tolerate your nonsense. Whether it is nonsense or not, presumably, you have no self-awareness. But it doesn't matter, I am also very angry now. Noah closed his eyes and sighed deeply. As he walked forward, he used some rough movements to tear open the collar of his shirt. Then his eyes suddenly opened. What Monkey King? What Wulin leader? If you want to fight, come to me face to face. Bastard. Chapter 1428. It had to be said that in the face of all kinds of capricious guys, Noah was really angry. Although the person who released Sun Wukong was Noah, if Susanoo didn't drag Noah into secluded world without permission, and had been singing a duet with the monk, doing whatever he wanted, then Noah wouldn't have attacked. If Noah didn't launch an attack and didn't use the good departure sword, the great sage, heaven's equal's curse wouldn't have been split open. The great sage, heaven's equal wouldn't have come out, let alone attract Luo Hao and cause all kinds of trouble. How could Noah not be angry when such a group of guys who didn't care about the feelings of others and only cared about their own enjoyment got involved in bigger and bigger troubles? But he couldn't sit back and do nothing. What's more, this time, Sun Wukong's appearance was very likely to attract guys like Nivea and Yarek. The trouble, like a snowball, became bigger and bigger. Originally, he just wanted to spend some time peacefully in this island country and properly think about how to deal with Noah, the final trial of the humans. However, his plan was directly destroyed by these guys. Perhaps, this was also the reason why Noah's nature was there, and there was no way to erase it. After all, powerful power was bound to attract all kinds of existences. Therefore, in this world, the deicide and the disobedient gods were often the center of various events. Like fate, they would always meet in various ways, kill each other, and cause disputes. This was universal no matter which world it was in. Therefore Noah, who had more power than the average deicide and disobedient gods, and even if he used all his strength, it was not impossible to wipe out all the deicide and disobedient gods. With this level of power, it was only a matter of time before he attracted all kinds of existences, and was involved in all kinds of events. However, even so, it didn't mean that Noah had no temper. Was it attracted by one's own power? Okay. But if you want to find fault, you have to be prepared to pay the price. Because it wasn't that Noah wouldn't fight back. Whether you are a deicide or a disobedient god, since you are ready to find trouble with others, then be prepared to be punished. After the words, Noah's hand bloomed with a bright light. The light turned into a dazzling white light and condensed into the shape of a sword. Noah held it tightly in his hand. After the light dissipated, the silver holy sword flowing with white light was exposed in the air. Demon Slayer. However, it wasn't the Demon Slayer that Aster transformed into. While the elf girl was still asleep and awakening all her power, Noah used weapon refinement to create his own unique elf device. Without Aster's cooperation, Noah wouldn't be able to display even half of Aster's strength before he went into hibernation. However, it was only with the help of the elven device that Noah was able to display such stunning sword skills. Thus, the energy source in Noah's body suddenly rotated, and all the energy in his body turned into endless divine might energy. The rich divine power was poured into the silver holy sword, causing the bright light to illuminate the entire space. Bring it on! In Noah's angry declaration, Luohao raised a hand in front of her, blocking the bright light that filled the entire space. Her gaze was fixed on Noah, and after a while, a dizzying smile bloomed on her beautiful face. Although I don't know what's going on, Rakshasa King, compared to before, you seem to have become a lot more violent, but at the same time, you have become a lot more majestic. Your current expression is an expression that only a true indomitable man would have. As expected of the king who once defeated me. Very good. Luohao's entire body surged with curse power as she shouted loudly. Since that's the case, let the unparalleled Luo Tsuelian prove the strength and perseverance of a foreign king. Let the world know that although I, Luohao, am a woman, I am also a hero who is not weaker than a man. His words caused another loud laughter to erupt from the crowd. That's right, that's right. That's how it should be. It doesn't matter if you're a woman. It doesn't matter if you're a man. As long as you can display your strength in a dignified manner. That is a hero who can support the heavens. How can I, the Monkey King, be left out of such an irresistible battle between heroes? Following this sentence, the curse power that surged out from the entire mountain suddenly went berserk. Soon after, the entire mountain began to tremble. Noah and Luohao's expressions froze at the same time, and their bodies tensed up, stabilizing their bodies. Under such circumstances, the mountain trembled more and more violently. Immediately after, Noah and Luohao sensed something and turned their heads at the same time, looking at the highest point of the mountain. Over there was a huge rock. At a certain moment, the trembling of the mountain suddenly stopped. Bang! Under the gaze of Noah and Luohao, the huge rock suddenly burst open, stirring up gravel all over the sky and scattering in all directions. Like bullets, the gravel shot in the direction of Noah and Luohao. Noah and Luohao's eyes flashed at the same time. One stepped on the ground and suddenly retreated, while the other stepped on the 8 trigram steps and glided away like a phantom. Bang 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 bang. Pieces of gravel fell to the ground like bullets, but they were like bombs, suddenly exploding the ground, smashing holes one after another. Then, in the huge rock that burst open, a golden light burst into the sky, turned into a figure, somersaulted, and stepped on a golden cloud that suddenly flashed. Sun Wukong, the Monkey King of the Mountain Curtain Cave of Huagua, the great sage equal to heaven, is here. Excellency Ape, who stepped on the cloud, lowered his head, and a pair of eyes called fiery golden eyes flashed with dazzling light. Godslayers, what are you waiting for? Tell me your names. Undoubtedly, high above the clouds, the voice of the great sage, heaven's equal, echoed clearly throughout the entire mountain top. Undoubtedly, the distance was extremely far, but the figure of the great sage, heaven's equal, was clearly imprinted in the eyes of Noah and Luohao. This alone was enough to show the great power of the great sage, heaven's equal. It seemed that at the moment when Noah and Luohao were about to confront each other, the great sage, heaven's equal, successfully regained his complete state and healed all his injuries. Finally, you've appeared? Great sage. Luohao looked up at the great sage, heaven's equal, in the clouds and shouted loudly. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. I've also been waiting for this moment for a long time. The great sage, heaven's equal, looked up to the sky and laughed. I didn't expect that as soon as I came out, I would meet two godslayers at the same time. Should I say that I'm lucky? Or unlucky? As he said this, the great sage, heaven's equal, laughed as a shocking amount of curse power surged out of his body. The vast amount of curse power turned into a substantial impact, with the great sage, heaven's equal, as the center. With a jolt, the clouds around the somersault cloud were all dispersed. Then the terrifying curse power poured down like water from the sky, like air that contained mass, fiercely suppressing everything. Feeling the terrifying curse power surging out of the great sage, heaven's equal's body, both Noah and Luo were shocked. This was because the terrifying curse power had far exceeded that of any disobedient god that the two of them had met in their lives. Take Noah for example. Noah felt that at this moment, the curse power of the great sage, heaven's equal, had surpassed that of Welslana, Mercado, Perseus, Susanu, and Athena. With the level of curse power that the great sage, heaven's equal, had displayed, one could imagine that his power was definitely greater than that of the other disobedient gods. What's going on? Noah couldn't hide his surprise. How did he suddenly become so strong? That's right. He suddenly became so strong. In secluded world, Noah had a short confrontation with the great sage, heaven's equal. At that time, the great sage, heaven's equal, had been hit by the wind pressure of the sword of guile, due to carelessness, and had been severely injured, resulting in a short confrontation. However, at that time, the great sage, heaven's equal, had not been as strong as he was now. Now, even Noah did not have the confidence to defeat the Monkey King without using his authority. What was going on? Chapter 1429. Wang. The great sage, heaven's equal's spell power surged out like a tidal wave from the sky. It enveloped the entire space, causing the gravity to suddenly increase by several times. The ground trembled slightly from the pressure. Sensing the terrifying curse power from the great sage, heaven's equal, Noah and Luohao's expressions turned solemn. Both of them were at the top of the God-slayers' ranks. Moreover, it was not the first time either of them had fought against the god of disobedience. Among them, there were naturally some who were at the top of the God-slayers' ranks in terms of power and reputation. They belonged to the highest level of the God-slayers' ranks. However, at this very moment, the great sage, heaven's equal, gave Noah and Luohao the feeling that he had completely descended into the god of disobedience that they had fought before. From Noah's perspective, the great sage, heaven's equal's power would definitely be at the top of the 4-digit ranks if he was in the box, comparable to some of the strongest species. And without using his authority, Noah did not have the power to match a 4-digit number of pinnacle beings. In other words, in terms of power alone, the great sage, heaven's equal, had now surpassed Noah and Luohao. Undoubtedly, the great sage, heaven's equal, had not been so strong when he was in the secluded world. Why had he suddenly become so strong now? Unfortunately, the great sage, heaven's equal, did not give Noah time to think. Come, God slayers, give me, old son, a battle that can quench my hot-bloodedness. As he shouted these words, the great sage, heaven's equal, turned his hand like an agile monkey. The Rui Jingubang, a peerless weapon, flashed in his hand. Immediately, the great sage, heaven's equal, turned his eyes of fire and gold to Noah's direction. That kid over there, you severely injured me in the secluded world. At that time, I said that I would get my revenge sooner or later. Now is the time. I'll start with you. As soon as he finished speaking, the somersault cloud that the great sage, heaven's equal, was standing on trembled suddenly. The golden cloud suddenly exploded, carrying the great sage, heaven's equal. It turned into a ray of light that flashed brilliantly. It drew a perfect parabola in the air and headed straight for Noah. On the somersault cloud, the great sage, heaven's equal, could achieve true godlike speed. That wasn't just a simple increase in speed. In essence, it was an ability to control time. Therefore, once one entered the state of God speed, not only would one's own speed increase explosively, but the speed of everything other than one's own body would also decrease drastically. Simply put, it was to increase one's sense of time by entering the God speed world. Under such circumstances, the great sage, heaven's equal, who was still far above the clouds, immediately rushed down in less than a second. He flashed in front of Noah with the help of a stream of light. In the eyes of the bystanders, it was only the blink of an eye. The figure that was still above the clouds had already arrived in front of Noah. Noah, on the other hand, felt a blur in front of his eyes. Then a figure suddenly rushed over. "Take my cudgel." The steel cudgel fell from the sky with a whistling sound. Like a windmill, it smashed heavily toward Noah's head with a sharp sonic boom. Under the power of God's speed, even Noah, who had superb sensing ability, could only sense movement when the great sage, heaven's equal, was within 3 meters of him. It was because he could sense movement that Noah was able to fight with an opponent who had the Godspeed authority without using the mind's eye technique. As a result, the energy under Noah's feet surged violently. A large amount of divine power gathered under his feet and suddenly exploded, causing Noah's figure to instantly take a step back, due to the push from the exploding divine power energy, as if he was moving horizontally. Swoosh! The extremely heavy Jingu cudgel immediately brushed past less than 5 centimeters in front of Noah, and landed in the air. The force it carried caused the ground to crack slightly with a kacha sound. The godly sea-calming needle, which weighed as much as 13,500 pounds, was indeed not for show. Understanding this, Noah narrowed his eyes. He extracted a part of the divine power from the source of divine power, turned it into magic power, and infused it into his hands and feet. Clang! A burst of magic light suddenly flashed on Noah's hands and feet. It turned into magic lines like electric wires, covering Noah's hands and feet. If he did not use magic to strengthen his arms and feet, he would not be able to deal with the great sage, heaven's equal's attack. After strengthening his arms and feet, Noah simply closed his eyes and focused all his attention on the use of sensing ability. He suddenly raised the holy sword in his hand. A steady stream of divine power was also infused. The holy sword flashed with a brilliant white light, causing Noah to turn into a bolt of lightning. With a sharp sound of breaking wind, he shot toward the great sage, heaven's equal, at extreme speed. Ultimate sword skill. Primary form: purple lightning. A sword as fast as lightning pierced out violently. At this time, only less than a second had passed since the great sage, heaven's equal, had swung his cudgel. Good timing. The great sage, heaven's equal, was both surprised and delighted when he sensed the swift and fierce sword. The somersault cloud beneath his feet rose abruptly, and the Jingu bang in his hand was like a piece of steel that fell from the sky, piercing downwards viciously. Clang! The shockingly heavy steel cudgel pierced the lightning sword that the great sage, heaven's equal, had just passed by. It collided with the holy sword, which was blooming with a brilliant white light, causing sparks to fly in all directions. Relying on its shocking weight, it pressed down the holy sword in Noah's hand. Then the somersault cloud carried the great sage, heaven's equal, and his body swooped down like a goshawk. He shot directly above Noah at the speed of a meteor. Then the great sage, heaven's equal's Jingu bang swung down heavily with a hair-raising wind. His every move had already reached the level of returning to simplicity and simplifying the complicated, but the might of his moves was even greater. In the face of such a merciless attack by the great sage, heaven's equal, Noah did not dare to be careless. The divine power under his feet gathered again and exploded, turning into a pushing force that pushed Noah's body back instantly. The holy sword in his hand went from bottom to top, stabbing towards the great sage, heaven's equal's throat. From the beginning to the end, Noah did not open his eyes. He relied on his sensing ability and was not blinded by the great sage, heaven's equal's lightning speed. Therefore, the sword that was stabbing towards the great sage, heaven's equal, was swung naturally in the direction of the great sage, heaven's equal's aura, without any deviation. Therefore, in the next moment, the holy sword that was stabbing upwards collided with the Jingu bang that was swinging downwards. Clang! The crisp sound of the collision rang out, causing a powerful impact. At the same time, Noah and the great sage, heaven's equal, were sent flying. Both of them retreated rapidly, pulling apart the distance between them. It was a long story, but the entire process of the battle only lasted a few seconds. Within a few seconds, Noah and the great sage, Heaven's equal had exchanged a few moves. They exchanged exquisite sword techniques with the Jingu Bang technique, but the outcome could not be determined. Of course, a few seconds was not enough to determine the outcome of the battle between the Godslayer and the God of Disobedience. However, the great sage, Heaven's equal's power had inexplicably increased significantly, becoming much stronger than Noah's. He still had the upper hand. The proof was that when Noah was still retreating, the great sage, Heaven's equal, had steadied himself on the somersault cloud. Like a shooting star, he continued to dash towards Noah at lightning speed. At this moment, a feminine voice rang out. "How dare you forget that I, Luo Tsualian, am still here? Great sage, you are indeed unforgivable." The moment the voice rang out, a beautiful figure suddenly appeared in front of the great sage, Heaven's equal. Facing the great sage, Heaven's equal, she struck out a palm that could break mountains and rivers and smash rocks. Clang! The delicate palm collided with the hard steel Jingu Bang, giving rise to the sound of metal clashing. What? The great sage, Heaven's equal, was shocked. "You actually took my Jingu Bang with your bare hands? The sea stabilizer of the East Sea Dragon Palace? That is indeed an earth-shattering divine weapon," Luo Hao said. "It's a pity that my fists and palms can split the sky and shatter the earth. If you can stabilize the sea, then I can stir it up again with one palm." After that, like a phoenix spreading its wings, the palm attack turned into a storm, enveloping the great sage, Heaven's equal. Chapter 1430. Amidst the sharp sound of the wind, palm strikes continuously erupted from Luo Hao's body. With the wave of her slender hand, palm shadows filled the sky and swept towards the great sage, Heaven's equal. Each of the palm shadows was like a phoenix spreading its wings in flight. They were both swift and beautiful as they continuously charged towards the great sage, Heaven's equal. This was the highest level palm technique that Luo Hao had ever practiced, the 12 flying phoenix divine palms. Looking at the palm strikes that swept through space and compressed the air to the point of creating sonic booms, Luo Hao must have also used the power that could bring about earth-shattering strength, the Vajra divine technique. The combination of strength and technique forced the great sage, Heaven's equal, whose strength had suddenly skyrocketed, to take it seriously. He quickly raised the Rui Jingu Bang in his hand and blocked in front of him. Like a violent storm, the palm strikes poured out like a curtain of rain and landed on the astonishingly heavy steel rod. Dang 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 dang. Immediately, as the palm with astonishing strength landed on the steel rod, a clear sound like that of a bell rang out continuously, as if it was ringing out continuously. The great sage, Heaven's equal, who was waving the Rui Jingu Bang slightly, blocked all of Luo Hao's palm strikes. However, the palm strikes contained an extremely strong force, causing the great sage, Heaven's equal's arm to gradually become numb. Riding on the somersault cloud, his figure was repeatedly pushed back. For a moment he was actually suppressed. No. To be able to block all of Luo Hao's palm strikes that combined the Vajra divine technique and the 12 flying phoenix divine palms, and only be pushed back, it was enough to show that the great sage, Heaven's equal, still firmly held the advantage. After all, every palm strike was a ferocious attack that could split mountains and split rocks. If the great sage, Heaven's equal, did not have the invincible Vajra body, it would not be surprising for an ordinary person to have their hand bones shattered and their internal organs ruptured. And to be able to block all of Luo Hao's palm strikes with a calm expression proved that the great sage, Heaven's equal, still had some strength left. The peerless Wuxia King saw this with her outstanding martial arts eyesight and immediately chanted, "One strength defeats 10 techniques, one strength suppresses 10 techniques. One kick carries the force of 1,000 caddies. One foot settles the earth." Through chanting the words of the Vajra divine art, Luo Hao raised the curse power circulating in her body by several levels in one breath, causing a majestic fluctuation of curse power to erupt from her soft and beautiful body. After that, Luo Hao raised her jade-like palm high up, slightly accumulating strength, and struck out with a palm strike that was heavier than any of her previous strikes. Clang! Accompanied by a metallic sound that was louder than any of the previous clashes, the great sage, Heaven's equal, who was standing on the somersault cloud, was sent flying by the powerful force. Bam 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 bam. Even though he was standing on the somersault cloud, and was quite a distance away from the ground, the great sage, heaven's equal, who was flying backward, caused the ground to be torn apart by the powerful force created by the friction between the air and the ground. A long gully was formed in the ground. Only after retreating a few hundred meters did the great sage, heaven's equal, control the somersault cloud and stabilize himself in mid-air. Phew! However, at this moment, an extremely sharp sound pierced through the air. The great sage, heaven's equal's eyes of fire and gold suddenly flashed, and he suddenly raised his head and looked forward. There, a holy sword that was shining with a brilliant white light shot out like an arrow from a bow, like a flash of light, in the direction of the great sage, heaven's equal. The great sage, heaven's equal, quickly raised the Rui Jingu Bang in his hand. Ding! The holy sword that shot out like an arrow immediately hit the Rui Jingu Bang, causing intense sparks. At this moment, a figure rushed out from the top of the mountain, cut through the air, and flashed in front of the holy sword. He raised a fist that gathered a large amount of divine power, and heavily punched the tip of the holy sword's hilt. Ultimate sword skill. Form 6 Shattered Tooth. The fist that gathered a large amount of divine power fell on the tip of the holy sword's hilt. With a bang, the dense divine power poured into the holy sword in the most violent way, like a shock wave. Stimulated by such a violent divine power, the silver holy sword bloomed with a dazzling white light, and with the force of the attack, it crazily hit the Rui Jingu Bang. Bang! The sound of glass shattering was heard. It was the sound of the holy sword that was stimulated by the most violent way, and the sharpness of the holy sword increased by several times in an instant. The fist that hit the tip of the hilt heavily pushed the Rui Jingu Bang out, and the holy sword shattered the Rui Jingu Bang. That was the effect of Form 6 of the ultimate sword skill, called Shattered Tooth. The purpose was to destroy the enemy's weapon. What? The great sage, heaven's equal's expression finally changed. At this moment, the holy sword, which had shattered the Rui Jingu Bang, continued to shoot forward without slowing down. It turned into a ray of cold light and shot towards the eyes of the great sage, heaven's equal, with the force of the fist that had struck the top of the sword hilt. Looking at the sharp sword tip that was constantly magnified in his eyes of fire and gold, the great sage, heaven's equal, did not have time to be surprised. He hurriedly rode the somersault cloud, turned into a phantom, and flew away like a meteor, avoiding the incoming attack. The holy sword that did not lose its momentum shot towards the sky. Until a certain moment, it suddenly exploded into pieces. Noah then floated down from midair, landing at a position some distance away from Luo Hao. In midair, Sun Wukong, who was standing on the somersault cloud, stared blankly at the broken Jingu Bang in his hands. After a long while, he came back to his senses and shot his lightning-like gaze at Noah. "You actually broke my Rui Jingu Bang?" If it was the real Rui Jingu Bang, of course, it wouldn't have been broken so easily, Noah said as he lifted his head and met the great sage's gaze. "It's a pity that the Jingu Bang in your hand is a god relic that was consolidated with authority. It's not the real thing, is it? Just like Susanu's Kusanagi sword, although it was a god relic, it was not the real Kusanagi sword. It was only a subordinate god that possessed the abilities of a god relic. The Rui Jingu Bang that the great sage, heaven's equal, was not the real stabilizing needle, but a god relic that was consolidated with authority. That was the reason why the Rui Jingu Bang was broken so easily by the demon slayer. Of course, the power of the ultimate sword skill was one of the reasons. However, the bigger reason was that the demon slayer had the ability to break all curses. That was the reason why the Rui Jingu Bang that was consolidated with authority could be broken by Noah's ultimate sword skill, that specialized in destroying weapons. "Devil King, I didn't know that you have such an exquisite sword skill," Luo Hao exclaimed in awe and anger at the same time. "Even I, who's said to be the best in the world in martial arts, can't find fault with such an exquisite sword skill. I think it's comparable to all the sword skills that I've learned in my life. Since you have such an exquisite sword skill, why didn't you use it during the battle with me the last time? Do you think that I, Luo Hao, am not qualified to make you use such a sword skill?" Before Noah could answer, the great sage, Heaven's equals laughter interrupted him. How exciting, God Slayers. One of you can take my Rui Jingu Bang with his bare hands while the other can break my stabilizing needle with his exquisite sword skill. It's amazing indeed. It seems like it's still dangerous for me to fight both of you at once even though I have the support of the ancient covenant. The great sage, Heaven's equals words attracted Noah's attention. The support of the ancient covenant? Noah looked at the great sage, Heaven's equal. Could it be that the ancient covenant is the reason why you suddenly became so strong? It was a pity that the great sage, Heaven's equal, did not answer. Instead he said, "It's indeed troublesome to deal with two God-slayers alone. I have no choice but to call for help." With that, the great sage, Heaven's equal, raised a palm and made a Buddhist chant. Treasure illuminates heaven and earth. Divine sword combines yin and yang. I, the great sage, Heaven's equal, Sun Wukong, used the covenant of brotherhood to summon my brothers. The solemn voice reverberated in the air. A vast amount of curse power erupted from the great sage, Heaven's equal's body, and spread in all directions. Chapter 1431. When the shockingly surging curse power centered on Sun Wukong, who was standing on the somersault cloud, surged in all directions like a tide. Noah and Luohao's hearts tightened at the same time. Although they didn't know what the great sage was planning to do, anyone with a discerning eye knew that it wouldn't be a good thing if they let him continue. However, Noah and Luohao only tensed their bodies and stared at the great sage, Heaven's equal. They didn't choose to attack. Noah didn't want to interrupt the great sage. He just wanted to see if he could unravel the secret of the sudden increase in power. Luohao didn't want to interrupt the great sage, simply because he felt that doing so would make him seem like he was afraid of the enemy's methods. That wasn't what the unparalleled Wuxia King should do. No matter what methods the enemy planned to use, Luo Zuelian could only show his bravery by defeating them with his own strength. Luohao did not want to interrupt the great sage, Heaven's equal, precisely because of his self-esteem that few would flatter. He was completely different from Noah, who rationally planned to observe the changes and find a flaw. Under such circumstances, the great sage, Heaven's equal, closed his eyes of fire and gold and raised a palm. With a solemn expression he chanted, Namo hi luo na tualuya, Namo ahaya, Polajia di shuaboluya, Bodhisattvayi, Mahasattvayi, Mahajia luanijia. That was a Buddhist mantra. In Journey to the West, the great sage was a figure who cultivated both Buddhism and Taoism. After successfully protecting Tang Sanzang and obtaining the Western Sutra, he was conferred the title of Victorious Fighting Buddha by the Western Gautama Buddha. Now the great sage, Heaven's equal, was a god of defiance, and his Buddhist side was infinitely suppressed. If one were to substitute the time period in the Journey to the West, the great sage, Heaven's equal's divine personality, was probably the divine personality of the time when the great sage, Heaven's equal, was wreaking havoc in the heavenly palace. That was why the great sage was so mischievous. He didn't have the Buddhist nature when he was conferred the title of Victorious Fighting Buddha in Journey to the West. However, such a great sage, Heaven's equal, had chanted a Buddhist mantra, proving that he intended to release the divinity of Buddhist cultivation. In that case, the methods that the great sage, Heaven's equal, would use next would definitely not be the methods that could be used during the uproar in heaven. Furthermore, the great sage, Heaven's equal, had said that he would call for reinforcements. Furthermore, the reinforcements would be his sworn brothers. Noah instantly figured out what the great sage was planning to do. It was also at this moment that a strange phenomenon occurred. Bang! Accompanied by a roar, the ground beneath the great sage, Heaven's equal, on the somersault cloud, suddenly exploded. Shortly after, a stone pillar and a fountain shot up from the ground and into the clouds. They carried with them an immense amount of curse power, and instantly climbed to the left and right sides of the great sage. Immediately afterward, the stone pillar and the fountain exploded with a boom sound. He was replaced by two figures. Two figures with frightening appearances could be seen. The one on the left was a pig man. He had a fat body, a pig's head, and his face was covered with short black hair. He had round eyes, cute triangular ears, and sharp fangs like a boar's. The one on the right was a weirdo with dark skin, towering hair that was as red as fire, sharp eyes, a big mouth, and a necklace made of small skulls around his neck. He wore a simple monk's robe. Of course, although his appearance was extremely frightening, regardless of whether he was a pig man or a weirdo, he was a true god. Furthermore, he was a very famous god who had a deep relationship with Sun Wukong. That is, Luo Hao frowned, and there was a faint look of surprise in his eyes. Canopy Marshal and Curtain Lifting General? Yes. The pig man and weirdo were the gods who protected Tang Sanzang on his journey to the west to retrieve the scriptures with the great sage, Heaven's Equal. Canopy Marshal Zhu Wuning. Curtain Lifting General, Sha Wujing. Together with the great sage, Heaven's Equal, Sun Wukong. In the past, they protected Tang Sanzang on his journey to the west to retrieve the scriptures. The three main characters who occupied an extremely important position in Journey to the West had finally all appeared. Subordinate gods. Noah stared at Canopy Marshal and Curtain Lifting General. That monkey actually summoned two gods who had a deep relationship with him from the myths, and made them his subordinate gods. The helpers that the great sage, Heaven's Equal, mentioned were the subordinate gods. Furthermore, if the two subordinate gods were summoned individually, they would definitely be gods of disobedience. They would be able to display divine power that was not weaker than an ordinary god of disobedience. It was completely different from Tian Songyun, which required a qualified holder to use it to display its power. In other words, the great sage, Heaven's Equal, summoned two gods of disobedience to become his subordinate gods. With the great sage, Heaven's Equal's current divine power, and his relationship with Canopy Marshal and Curtain Lifting General in the myths, he could completely do this. If this is the case, we have the advantage in terms of numbers. The great sage Heaven's Equal shouted. Second brother. Third brother. I'll have to trouble you to share an opponent with your eldest brother. Canopy Marshal and Curtain Lifting General seemed to have suddenly come to their senses at this moment. Their eyes gradually brightened. Eldest brother, let old pig help you. Canopy Marshal looked at Luo Hao with a lecherous gaze. That fairy over there is so beautiful as Chang'e. Let me deal with her. I naturally do not dare to disobey eldest brother's orders. Curtain Lifting General spoke in a deep voice. Then I'll join forces with second senior brother to deal with the Godslayer from our hometown. Good. The great sage, Heaven's Equal, said heroically. Let the three of us reenact the legend of slaying 10,000 demons and 10,000 ghosts. We will destroy all demons and ghosts that stand in our way. Yes, eldest brother. Canopy Marshal and Curtain Lifting General immediately responded. At the same time, a black cloud appeared under their feet. Like a meteor falling from the sky, they rushed in Luo Hao's direction. Mere subordinate gods. How dare you try to subdue me, Luo Hao? Luo Hao looked coldly at the two demons descending from the sky. Very well. Let me meet the once famous Marshal Tianpeng and the Curtain Lifting General. With that said, Luo Hao's figure turned, and a burst of bright flower petals rolled up around his body. He turned into a beautiful stream of light and soared into the sky, rushing in the direction of the two demons who were descending from the sky. Seeing this, Noah was just about to take action when a loud shout stopped him. Let my junior brothers deal with those who are in the way. Godslayer, your opponent is me. With that, the great sage Heaven's Equal, who was standing on the somersault cloud, turned into a meteor and shot toward Noah at lightning speed. He waved one of the two halves of his Jingu Bang and smashed it heavily toward Noah's head. Noah's eyes narrowed. He raised one hand and let a brilliant flash bloom in his hand. It turned into a silver holy sword and met the attack. Clang! With a crisp sound, sparks appeared like water splashes and scattered in all directions. Noah and the great sage, Heaven's Equal, took advantage of the force and leaped backward like agile monkeys, creating a distance between them. Godslayer, your weapon seems to be formed by some kind of magic, right? The great sage, Heaven's Equal, looked at the holy sword in Noah's hand. Then I can't show any weakness. With that, the great sage, Heaven's Equal, chanted a spell and let the power of the spell surge. He then put the two halves of the Jingu Bang together. With a flash, the two halves of the Jingu Bang were restored to its original state. The great sage, Heaven's Equal, swung it and held it under his armpit. It was because the Jingu Bang was a weapon that was manifested by the great sage, Heaven's equals power, that it could be restored so quickly. However, Noah was not paying attention to this. Feeling the power of the spell surging from the great sage, Heaven's equal, Noah first frowned and then said in surprise, "Your power of the spell seems to have decreased a lot, right? Oh, did you notice?" The great sage, Heaven's equal, laughed nonchalantly. "I have no choice. With the power of my 2 junior brothers, I don't think they can deal with the Godslayer who is from our hometown. Therefore, I shared the divine power of the ancient covenant with them." You mentioned the ancient covenant just now, right? Noah looked directly at the great sage, Heaven's equal. What exactly is that? Chapter 1432. When they first met in the secluded world, Noah and the great sage had a brief confrontation. At that time, the great sage's power was equally astonishing. Even among the disobedient gods, he was at the highest level. He was stronger than Susanu, and definitely not weaker than the gods that Noah had killed before. But at that time, Noah had the confidence to defeat the great sage, even if he did not use his powers. But this time, until just now, the power that the great sage had displayed had completely surpassed his state in the secluded world. It had increased to the point where even Noah did not have the confidence to defeat him. That increase in strength was truly a little strange. I don't think that you are the type to hide your strength. When you were in the secluded world, the strength that you displayed should be your full strength. Noah's gaze landed on the great sage, Heaven's equal, who was standing on the somersault cloud. "So, I think that there must be a reason why your power suddenly became so strong." "You are right. That reason is the ancient covenant that I mentioned." The great sage did not hide it anymore, and directly answered Noah's question. "That is the covenant that the gods jointly established in order to suppress the demon king who killed the gods. As long as the conditions are met, then the gods who fought the demon king who killed the gods can receive blessings from heaven, earth, and the stars to increase their own strength. At the end of the day, the so-called gods are all-encompassing. Hence, it is not strange for them to receive blessings from the heavens, earth, and stars," the great sage, Heaven's equal, said with a smug expression on his face. Unfortunately, not all gods have the ability to receive the blessings from the heavens and the stars. Only a small number of steel, who possess considerable authority and martial prowess, have this privilege. My martial prowess is well known throughout the world, so it shouldn't be strange for me to receive this privilege, right? The covenant that was established in order to suppress the demon king who killed the gods. So it was called an ancient covenant. Thinking about it, it made sense. For the gods, being killed by mere mortals and having their powers usurped was an unforgivable result. It was not strange for them to respond to this. However, just as the great sage equaling heaven had said, not all gods had this authority. Otherwise, the Godslayers would have all perished on the battlefield in their crusade against the disobedient god. In addition, according to the great sage, Heaven's equal, if one wanted to obtain this power, they would need to fulfill the conditions. Recalling the difference between the last time and this time, Noah's heart skipped a beat. Is that condition to face multiple Godslayers? Indeed. Great sage equaling heavens nodded. As long as I'm up against multiple Godslayers, I can use the ancient covenant to borrow the power of the stars. Now this power has been lent to my junior brothers. This way, even if my 2 junior brothers are only subordinate gods, they can still hold back the Godslayer from the same hometown. Now as long as I defeat you and the other Godslayer, this war of heroes will be my old son's victory. Great sage equaling heaven laughed heartily. There's no time to lose, Godslayer. Hurry up and fight with me, old son, for 300 rounds. As soon as he finished speaking, the somersault cloud under the great sage equaling heaven's feet trembled. With a whoosh, it instantly approached Noah. Once he entered the attack range, the great sage equaling heaven did not hesitate to wave the Jingu Bang in his hand. The heavy steel rod was like a flexible whip, drawing a series of afterimages in the air, and smashing toward Noah's body. His superb sensing ability allowed Noah to react in time. With a sidestep, his body nimbly retreated. The holy sword in his hand was like a shield, waving in front of him, protecting Noah's entire body behind it. Clang, 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 clang. The countless rod shadows smashing fiercely fell on the holy sword one after another, causing a series of crisp sounds, causing bursts of sparks and impacts to vibrate frequently, spreading in all directions. Every blow made Noah feel an extremely heavy force rushing from the holy sword, shaking Noah's sword-wielding hand until it was numb. His body also retreated violently, constantly crushing the ground, leaving a series of potholes. Although it was not the real thing, the Jingu Bang that the great sage equaling heaven manifested with his own power still had a weight of 13,500 pounds, which was frighteningly heavy. Being constantly attacked by such a steel rod, if it were not for the blessing of LV5 ability value and the use of magic to strengthen his arm strength, Noah would not have been able to withstand the fierce offensive. After all, although Noah had the blessing of the Leo Sun Sovereign, and had the gift of invulnerability, it was only invulnerability. It was immune to all attacks of sharp weapons. But the Jingu Bang of the great sage equaling heaven was not a sharp weapon, so the attacks it caused could completely be turned into damage, affecting Noah. If it was Galgi, he could use the Leo Sun Sovereign to draw out the concept of rebounding all weapons and bounce the Jingu Bang away. However, Noah was not the incarnation of Vishnu, so there was no way to use the Leo Sun Sovereign to draw out the power of the Leo Sun Sovereign to reflect all weapons. He could only bounce off sharp weapons and achieve invulnerability. Therefore, for Noah, the attack of the great sage equaling heaven was indeed quite troublesome. Fortunately, Noah still had the enhancement of the Dragon Sun Sovereign, which could greatly increase the output of energy. Therefore, Noah extracted a large amount of divine power, and instilled it into the holy sword in his hand. Wang, the elven magic equipment named Demon Slayer, immediately bloomed with a dazzling white light. Under the illumination of that dazzling white light, the body of the great sage equaling heaven, who was attacking at lightning speed, suddenly slowed down and retreated from the state of lightning speed. Although it was only an imitation of the elven magic equipment using the weapon refinement magic, the curse-breaking ability of the Demon Slayer still existed. Under the infusion of a large amount of divine power, the curse-breaking ability triggered by the Demon Slayer was already able to temporarily break the authority of the God Slayer and the God of disobedience. Therefore, the great sage equaling heaven's lightning speed authority was directly broken, and he retreated from the state of lightning speed. Clang! At this moment, Noah's body turned into lightning, and with the holy sword emitting a dazzling white light, he violently stabbed in the direction of the great sage equaling heaven. Impressively, it was the initial form of the ultimate sword technique, purple lightning. Not good. The great sage equaling heaven suddenly let out a strange cry, and hurriedly turned his body to the side. Chi. The holy sword, which contained a sharp sound of breaking wind, brushed past the great sage equaling heaven's open chest and landed in the air. The divine power it carried was like a solid wind, and it pierced the great sage equaling heaven's chest, causing him to feel a burning pain. However, in the next moment, the holy sword in Noah's hand once again emitted a dazzling white light under the infusion of a large amount of divine power. Ultimate Sword Technique. Form 3. Dance of the Moon Shadow. The holy sword, which had brushed past the great sage equaling heaven's chest and landed in the air, suddenly turned into a ray of moonlight. Like a full moon, it carried a tranquil aura as it slashed past with force. If this slash had landed on the great sage equaling heaven's body, it was possible that it would have directly cut him in half. This was because the curse-breaking ability of the great sage equaling heaven's indestructible body was not something that could not be broken by the Demon Slayer. In addition, the dance of the moon shadow had been strengthened by the dragon's sovereignty of the sun, and a large amount of divine power. Such a slash caused the great sage equaling heaven's hair to stand on end. At this critical moment, the great sage equaling heaven suddenly lay down on his back, as if his waist had been broken, and directly used an iron bridge. Swoosh! The slash, which was like moonlight, once again brushed past the chest of the great sage equaling heaven, who was lying on his back, and suddenly slashed past. You're really something, Godslayer. The great sage equaling heaven shouted loudly. With a shake of his arm, the heavy steel rod was like a heavy hammer as it swept towards Noah's waist. But before that, Noah's figure leapt up and onto the top of the great sage equaling heaven's head. Chi. The silver holy sword, which was mixed with a violent force, seemed to tear all the air apart as it ruthlessly slashed down towards the great sage equaling heaven below. Chapter 1433. Chi. In the sharp sound of the air breaking, the holy sword, shining with dazzling white light, came down from top to bottom. It was aimed directly at the abdomen of the great sage, heaven's equal, who was lying on his back on the somersault cloud, and making a standard iron bridge. There was no mercy in the attack. Once hit, the famous great sage, heaven's equal would inevitably end up being cut in half at the waist. Left with no choice, the great sage, heaven's equal could only raise the Jingu Bang in front of him. Clang! The silver sacred sword slashed down heavily on the Ru'i golden cudgel, creating a loud sound that sounded like the ringing of a bell. Chi. The holy sword and the steel Jingu Bang rubbed against each other, sputtering intense sparks. Noah gritted his teeth and the veins on his arms bulged. He exerted all his strength and pressed the holy sword heavily on the great sage, heaven's equal's body. With this pressure, the Jingu Bang that the great sage, heaven's equal was pushed back little by little, causing the holy sword to get closer and closer to the great sage, heaven's equal. Feeling that he was completely suppressed, the great sage, heaven's equal seemed to feel a little angry. He tried his best to support the Jingu Bang and shouted, "I, the great sage, heaven's equal, have even withstood the 5-finger mountain of the Buddha. I don't believe that I can't withstand a broken sword." With these words, the great sage, heaven's equal's curse power surged and he shook the Jingu Bang in his hand. Clang! In the crisp sound, the Jingu Bang, which was lifted up, released a strong force and bounced back the holy sword that fell on the Jingu Bang. Then the great sage, heaven's equal, slapped the somersault cloud beneath him and straightened up. The Jingu Bang in his hands spun rapidly, forming a windmill. Suddenly, it stopped and the great sage, heaven's equal, stabbed it forward viciously. Whoosh! Like an arrow, the golden hooped cudgel violently pierced out, bringing with it a sharp gust of wind. The sound of air explosion was ear-piercing, and it mercilessly hit Noah's chest heavily, as if it had turned into an arrow. Clang! In the end, the golden cudgel that was thrust out landed directly on the holy sword that Noah had lifted. The astonishing weight turned into a solid impact, exploding on the holy sword. It was as if a cannonball had landed on it. An extremely strong force shook Noah and sent him flying. This tremor sent Noah flying a few hundred meters away. He flew out of the mountain peak and into the air. Therefore, Noah managed to stabilize his body with great difficulty and hovered there. Bang! The holy sword, which was shining with a dazzling white light, finally shattered into pieces and disappeared with a loud explosion. Tisk! Noah could not help but be speechless. As expected, imitations can only be used to this extent. Unlike the golden cudgel that the great sage equaling heaven had, Noah's demon slayer was only an imitation created by magic. Compared to his authority, Noah's magic that came from his ability points was obviously inferior by quite a few levels. Not to mention, the magic called weapon refinement had a lot of limitations. The weapon that was created would be weakened to a certain extent depending on the level, performance, and ability of the weapon. The weapon that was created would also depend on the level, performance, and ability of the weapon to determine the duration of the weapon. With the level of the demon slayer, even if an imitation was created, the duration of the weapon would only be a few minutes. Furthermore, there was another limitation to this spell. That was, once the level of the weapon was too high, it would have to wait until the duration of the weapon was over. Otherwise, a second weapon with the same duration could not be created. Otherwise, if Noah created the Demon Slayer and the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear at the same time, even the golden cudgel of the great sage equaling heaven would not be able to block Noah's sword. Therefore, it was destined that Noah could only create one weapon in a high-level battle if he wanted to use weapon refinement to create a useful weapon. Against an opponent like the great sage, heaven's equal, who had the seraphic speed authority, using weapons like Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear and White Dragon Emperor's divine dividing wings, which could only be activated once every 10 seconds, was simply courting death. Therefore, compared to the Red Dragon Emperor's boosted gear, and the White Dragon Emperor's divine dividing wings, which had a harsh time requirement, the Demon Slayer, which could weaken the power of authority to a certain extent, was undoubtedly the most suitable weapon to use. Unfortunately, this level of weapon also had a time limit. Furthermore, the magic that could create this weapon did not use the energy in Noah's energy source to activate it. Instead, it used the magic converted from mental strength to be used. Furthermore, Noah's mental strength was not limitless and would be exhausted sooner or later. Once his mental strength was exhausted, he would directly faint. If that was the case, Noah would be considered to have lost without a fight. Because of this, Noah had to control the number of times he used weapon refinement. Perhaps seeing through this, the great sage, Heaven's Equal, stepped on the somersault cloud and slowly floated up to the same height as Noah, and laughed gloatingly. Godslayer, your weapon seems to be much weaker than my Jingu Bang. I wonder if it can be repaired and used at any time like me? Hearing this, Noah ignored Sun Wukong, who was gloating over his misfortune. Instead, he calmly calculated. If he used the Spear of Longinus and Enkidu, he should be able to deal a fatal blow to the great sage equaling heaven. However, the great sage equaling heaven's lightning speed was a problem, and it would be very difficult to hit him. Even if he created the Demon Slayer and forced the great sage equaling heaven to retreat from his lightning speed, it would still be very difficult to hit him with his extreme speed that was comparable to that of a spiritual monkey. As for the other treasures, even if they had a sure hit effect, it would become a pursuit, and it would be very difficult to hit the great sage equaling heaven. Even if he could hit him, the great sage equaling heaven's invincible Vajra body would be a problem. Were there any treasures that could be useful against the great sage equaling heaven? In Noah's mind, treasures flashed one after another. Finally, the image of a treasure stopped in Noah's mind. No. To be more precise, it should be 2 treasures. Then, the plan of how to use these 2 treasures also formed in Noah's mind. Noah's eyes flashed. Let's try it. As soon as he said that, the source of divine power inside Noah's body that was filled with a steady stream of divine power, suddenly turned into a source of mana with endless mana. Then, Noah let the surging mana surge in his body and flow throughout his body. Wong. A golden ripple that looked like a water wave rippled around Noah's body. That's right. It did not appear around him but around Noah's body. Like a ripple, it swallowed Noah's body. The great sage equaling heaven suddenly narrowed his eyes and became alert. However, in the next moment, the scene that appeared in front of the great sage equaling heaven stunned this unparalleled monkey king. Clang! Dazzling golden light flashed in the air. In the center of the bright light, Noah floated there. The bright golden light was shining from Noah's body. To be more precise, it was shining from the armor on Noah's body. That was a set of armor. The entire set of armor was golden and shone like the sun. It did not look heavy. Instead, it gave off a slender feeling. It was tightly attached to Noah's skin. Other than the helmet, the rest of the armor was fully equipped. Wearing such an armor, Noah seemed to have turned into the sun. He raised his head and looked at the great sage equaling heaven. The corner of his mouth slowly lifted. In the next second, Noah said, "I'm going to kill you. I'll let you have the next move." Chapter 1434. Next move, I'll let you have it. When these words came out of Noah's mouth, who was shining with dazzling light like the sun and was clad in golden armor, the great sage, Heaven's Equal's stunned expression gradually disappeared. The great sage, Heaven's Equal, stared intently at the golden armor on Noah's body with his fiery golden eyes. He opened his mouth and spoke in a threatening tone. "Godslayer, what game are you playing? Can't you tell what game I'm playing with your eyes of fire and gold?" Noah narrowed his eyes and said sarcastically, "No matter if it's a monkey show or a game, it has to end. Now it's time for this monkey show to end. You little yellow-haired brat." The great sage equaling heaven seemed to be laughing in spite of himself, but at the same time, he seemed to have lost his temper. "Are you saying that you can defeat Old Sun in the next move? Whether I can or can't, Let the result prove it. Noah looked at the great sage and smirked. I just want to know if the famous great sage, heaven's equal, is afraid. I'm afraid. The great sage pointed at his own nose and sneered. I, the great sage Sun Wukong, have seen all kinds of demons and ghosts. Why would I be afraid of a little brat who is younger than my monkey grandchildren? In that case, I'll say the same thing. Noah stretched out his hand and made a provocative gesture. Next move, I'll let you have it. Great sage, heaven's equal, just attack. I won't fight back. This is your last move. After this move, it'll be your death. Hearing this, the great sage was furious. Little brat, how dare you look down on me, the great sage, heaven's equal Sun Wukong. Very well, I'll let you have a taste of my Rui Jingu Bang's full power. Driven by anger, the great sage's equal's body surged with a shocking amount of curse power. It turned into a turbulent flow and poured into the heavy steel rod in his hand. Take this. With a loud shout, the great sage, heaven's equal, stepped on the somersault cloud and turned into a flash of light. He tore through the space and shot in front of Noah in an instant. In the next moment, the Rui Jingu Bang, which carried the power of 1,000 caddies, crushed the air wherever it passed. It caused a deafening sonic boom as it smashed heavily into Noah's chest. Clang. The earth-shattering knocking sound was accompanied by a burst of violent impact chi. It shook the entire air and turned into ripples, spreading in all directions. Like a gust of wind, it blew down, crushing the trees on the mountain peak below. One by one they fell down, and even the ground cracked. However, in the center of the impact, a hand suddenly reached out and grabbed the arm of the great sage, who was smashing the Jingu Bang. I've caught you. This voice shocked the great sage, heaven's equal. He raised his head abruptly and looked in the direction of Noah. There, Noah reached out one hand and tightly grasped the arm of the great sage, heaven's equal. He ignored the Rui Jingu Bang that smashed into his chest, and his eyes flashed with a terrifying light. In this way you can't use your speed to escape, right? The great sage, heaven's equal, was shocked. You're fine? Yes. I'm fine. The great sage, heaven's equal, mustered all his divine power and swung the godly sea-steadying needle that weighed 13,500 caddies. It landed on Noah's body, but Noah was unscathed. There was not even a crack on the armor that shone like the sun. Sun wheel, turn into armor, Kavacha and Kundala. This was the real name of the armor on Noah's body. In Hindu mythology, it was a half-human, half-god hero born from the sun god Surya and a mortal woman, Gandhi. His real name was Karna, the son of the sun god. From the moment this demigod was born, his father, the sun god Surya, had given him a golden armor that was integrated with his body and could emit the light of the sun. This defensive type of noble artifact was formed by light itself. Even the gods would find it difficult to destroy it. As long as the relic was equipped, it could nullify more than 90% of the effects of all hostile interference, be it physical or conceptual attacks. The relic would only cause the user to suffer 1/10 of the damage. Its defense was amazing and it could heal itself when it was damaged. Therefore, as the owner of this relic, when Karna was equipped with this relic, he was even known as an undying hero. Its defense was quite amazing. Even if he were to take a hit from a grade A+ military relic, his movements would not be affected. The relic was in grade A relic, which was the highest grade. In theory, it was the highest grade treasure except for the plus type of treasure that had an instantaneous amplification effect, and the X grade treasure. Originally, because this treasure was integrated with Karna's armor, it should not be in Noah's treasure vault. However, in Hindu mythology, Karna later peeled off this armor that was integrated with his body, along with his skin, and offered it to Indra, the heavenly emperor. In view of this, Gaia and Alaya could also store this treasure in Noah's treasure vault. With this treasure, even if the Jingu Bang, which weighed 13,500 pounds, hit Noah's body, there would only be 1/10 of the damage left. With Noah's LV5 and SSS level durability, basic ability, and the weakening effect of Sword's protection, this level of damage could be completely withstood. Of course, Noah's real purpose was not to withstand the attack of the Monkey King without suffering any damage. Instead, after withstanding the attack, he wanted to catch the Monkey King and prevent him from using his speed and escape. Decompose. Golden armor. Noah gripped the great sage equaling heaven tightly with one hand and raised his other hand high into the air. The armor on Noah's body that was shining with a dazzling golden light suddenly trembled. On his body, neat and tidy lines suddenly appeared. Along the neat dividing lines that suddenly appeared, the golden armor disintegrated piece by piece. Like pieces of paper, it was blown up by the wind and gathered in Noah's hand that was raised up high. Not long after, the fragments of the golden armor gathered into a spear. It was a huge, gorgeous spear that flashed with lightning and exuded a terrifying aura of destruction. Feeling the terrifying aura of the huge and gorgeous spear, the Monkey King's expression changed abruptly. It was not until this moment that the Monkey King realized he had been tricked. However, it was already too late for him to realize it now. In Hindu mythology, when Karna offered the golden armor to Indra, in return, Indra gave Karna another noble phantasm. When the owner used a golden armor as an exchange, this precious artifact would appear. It was a noble phantasm that was obtained in exchange for a huge defensive power, and it was extremely powerful against gods. Its effect was that regardless of whether it was a living creature, non-living creature, or any object, including magical beasts, phantasmal beasts, divine beasts, humans, shields, armies, cities, boundaries, and even gods, all of them would be targeted as a unit and released, completely burning and dissolving the unit. Only the concept of world could not take effect. It was a noble phantasm that could defeat gods with one blow, and it could only exert the effect of one blow, giving up and decomposing the golden armor. Even the king of gods could not touch it. Even Gilgamesh, who claimed to have the prototype of all the treasures of an era, did not have it in his treasure vault. It was a spear of destruction made of lightning. Its name was Sun Wheel, submit to death Vasvi Shakti. As the real name of the relic was released, the huge and gorgeous spear that Noah lifted up emitted dazzling lightning. Soon after, it turned into a spear of light. Holding the dazzling spear of light that illuminated the whole world, Noah's eyes flashed with a fierce light. Facing the Monkey King's horrified expression, he threw the spear of light in his hand down heavily. Boom! A rumbling sound exploded in the air, setting off a burst of shocking lightning. It was as if lightning had descended, bursting out and exploding at the location where the rumbling sound came from. Ah! The great sage, Heaven's equals screams rang out amidst the terrifying lightning. Chapter 1435. Boom. Amidst the booming sounds, the violent thunderbolts were like auroras that covered the entire sky. They exploded on the top of the mountain, turning into a thunder pool that floated in mid-air. They continued to cause explosions and galloping thunder, and continued to expand. In this instant, whether it was Luo Hao who was fighting with Marshal Tian Peng and the curtain-lifting general, Hui Na and Lu Yinghua who were fighting, or even the residents of the city at the foot of the mountain, they all raised their heads to look at the berserk lightning pool that suddenly appeared in the air, their faces filled with shock. Even the most ordinary of humans could feel the terrifying destructive power contained within each bolt of lightning, causing them to instinctively tremble. And in that violent lightning pool, bolts of lightning that carried terrifying heat and destructive power suddenly flashed and covered the great sage, Heaven's equals body. Ah! Under the scorching heat and destructive power, the great sage, Heaven's equal let out a shrill cry of agony. The noble artifact named Vasvi Shakti treated the great sage, Heaven's equal, as a unit and unleashed a terrifying power that could even burn and dissolve the gods. Furthermore, the sword gods who were crowned with the attribute of steel, all shared the same characteristic, which was that they would melt away under the terrifying heat of the flames. The spear of light, which was capable of destroying even the gods, was now the best weapon to bury the great sage equaling heaven. Karna, who had this noble artifact, was known as an undying hero spirit that was no weaker than Gilgamesh, the hero king. As for this relic, its level had also reached the exceptional level of X compared to the obedient departing sword, yea? It wasn't any weaker. In terms of classification, this relic belonged to the category of godly relic. Therefore, the great sage, heaven's equal, had no chance of surviving the direct attack of the god-slaying spear, which was known as a sure kill. He didn't even have the time to say his last words. The god of steel, who was famous throughout the land of China for being able to borrow the power of the heavens, earth, and stars, and was superior to most of his kind, screamed as his entire body was incinerated by the terrifyingly high temperature and destructive power, melting into slag. Eventually, the figure of the great sage, heaven's equal, Sun Wukong, gradually disappeared from the rampaging lightning pool. The thunderbolts, which carried terrifying heat and destructive power, continued to run, illuminating the entire world. Eldest senior brother actually lost? Then there's no other way. The canopy marshal and the curtain-lifting general, who had been blessed by the great sage, heaven's equal, stiffened in their battle with Luo Hao. They only had time to utter these words before one of them began to petrify, while the other began to liquefy. In the next second, one of the two gods that had turned into a stone statue and a water statue gradually shattered, while the other dispersed into water. Just like that, they directly disappeared. That was to be expected. The canopy marshal and the curtain-lifting general were originally subordinate gods that the great sage, heaven's equal, had summoned with great divine power. Now, as the summoner, the great sage, heaven's equal, had been eliminated and returned to the legends. The two summoned subordinate gods naturally had no reason to exist alone. Together with the great sage, heaven's equal, they also disappeared from this world. At this point, the great sage, heaven's equal, had been killed. Luo Hao, whose entire body was spewing flames formed by powerful curse power, watched as the canopy marshal and the curtain-lifting general disappeared. Then he raised his head and looked at the rampaging lightning pool that carried terrifying destructive power in the sky. His gaze gradually became serious. Even the unparalleled Wuxia King had to admit that. In the face of that attack, even if it was him, if he was hit, he would only end up dying. To think that he was still hiding such power. However, Noah Doria, I Luo Tsuilian, will not admit defeat because of this. At this moment, what emerged in Luo Hao's heart was a competitive spirit that he had not felt for a long time after becoming a godslayer. If Luo Hao regarded Warban as an enemy who would either kill him or live, then at this moment, Luo Hao regarded Noah as a lifelong rival and opponent. The surging competitive spirit made the peerless beauty of the land of China feel extremely passionate, and a beautiful smile gradually appeared on her face. In addition to Luo Hao, there were many people present who were staring at the rampaging lightning pool that had suddenly appeared in mid-air. For example, Hui Na and Luinghua, who had stopped their duel at the foot of the mountain. Another example was the people who had been attracted by the powerful curse power of the god of disobedience and the god of deicide, which was far superior to all existences, hiding in the dark and witnessing this duel with their own eyes. On another mountain some distance away from the mountain where Noah and Luo Hao were, Ganivia looked at the rampaging lightning pool that had suddenly appeared in midair, his lips trembling slightly. What a terrifying power! Ganivia, whose predecessor was the goddess of disobedience, had given up her immortal life and transcendent divinity in order to create the Holy Grail, and thus degenerated into a god ancestor, could clearly feel it. How powerful a threat was that rampaging lightning pool to a god? As an anti-god treasure that could only exert the effect of one hit, but could even destroy the gods with one hit, the X-level sun, submit to death Vasvi Shakti, was even more terrifying than the spear of Longinus. After all, the spear of Longinus had to exert different degrees of power depending on the level of divinity, but the sun, submit to death Vasvi Shakti, simply destroyed the existence of a god as a unit. No matter how high the divinity of the opponent's god was, no matter how strong the enemy's god was. In addition to the concept of the world, the threat of the spear of certain destruction, which destroyed everything as a unit, was probably above that of the sword of good departure, yea. Why is that lord here? Why does he have such a terrifying power? Ganivia, who had spied on the entire confrontation between Noah and the great sage, heaven's equal with magic, uttered fearful words. Do we really have to be enemies with such an existence? It had to be said that Noah really left a terrible shadow in Genivia's heart. As the immortal goddess of discord, Guinevere was also a god ancestor above humans. On the surface, Guinevere was polite, but in fact he was extremely arrogant. Otherwise, Guinevere would not have been enemies with the Black Prince Yarek and the God Slayer. In the past, Guinevere had also faced many transcendent existences. However, it was the first time that he felt fear for a person from the bottom of his heart like now. When Noah used unknown means to take the Holy Grail from Guinevere's hands that even Yarek could not take, and also made it impossible for Guinevere to summon the Holy Grail back. And when Noah almost forced Guinevere into a dead end after killing Perseus, Guinevere's heart had already been traumatized. Now seeing that Noah could even destroy steel, who could borrow the power of heaven, earth, and stars, the trauma in Guinevere's heart turned into real fear. Now Guinevere was very sure. Noah was definitely Yarek, and even more terrifying than the other godslayers. Lancelot also had the same idea. He did not show his figure, but he witnessed Noah's power through the eyes of the demon queen under his protection. He was also trembling because of the terrible power of the Godslayer. However, it was different from Guinevere. Lancelot's trembling was not because of fear, but because of excitement. Such power, I really want to fight with him. For this, Lancelot trembled. Like Tian Songyan, Lancelot was also the most original, purest, and most primitive steel. Although the current Lancelot was only a shadow of God on the ground to protect Guinevere, the instinctive desire to fight still existed. Under such circumstances, Guinevere thought of something, and a disc suddenly appeared in his hand. On the disc, a sword-shaped mark slowly emerged. Looking at this mark, Guinevere's expression changed abruptly. Oh no! Chapter 1436. Beep beep. The flashing lightning gradually began to dissipate, and the strong light that illuminated the whole world gradually began to dim. Together with the diminishing lightning, it slowly converged. Not long after, the violent lightning pool that appeared under the sky became smaller and smaller until it completely disappeared, leaving only a few flashes of lightning that ran back and forth in the space. In the lightning, Noah's figure slowly emerged. He was suspended in the air, but his body was hanging down weakly. Taking a closer look, on Noah's body, his black shirt and black trousers were gradually dyed with a scarlet color. Noah's brows were tightly knitted together, and there was some pain on his face. Only Noah could feel it clearly. Under his clothes that were gradually dyed with a scarlet color, his skin was cracking inch by inch, and there was almost no part of his skin that was intact. The scarlet color that dyed Noah's clothes red was caused by Noah's own blood. Since the noble phantasm called Sun, Obey Death Vasvi Shakti, had the terrible power to kill gods in one blow, it was not a power that could be used casually. First of all, if one wanted to use Sun, Obey Death Vasvi Shakti, they would have to imitate the legend of Karna sacrificing the immortal sun armor and sacrifice Sun, turn into armor, Kavacha and Kundala. This noble phantasm would be integrated with the body, and when it was removed, it would naturally cause harm to the wearer. By imitating the legend of Karna sacrificing the sun armor to obtain the god-killing spear, Noah also had to bear the damage that he would have to bear when the armor was removed. The reason why Noah's skin was cracking inch by inch was because of this. In addition, Sun, Obey Death, Vasvi Shakti, was also a noble phantasm that only had the power to attack once. That was to say, after the attack, whether it could kill the enemy or not, the god-killing spear would disappear and could not be used again in a short period of time. Similarly, the sun turned into armor, Kavacha and Kundala, that was sacrificed could not be used again in a short period of time. It could only be restored after a period of time. This was the limitation of the two noble phantasms. Therefore, Noah could no longer use the two noble phantasms of the immortal hero Karna. He had to wait for a period of time before he could use them again. Enduring the excruciating pain all over his body, Noah clenched his teeth slightly and reached out a hand to take out a bottle of potion from the golden ripples that suddenly fluctuated like water. He unscrewed the cap of the bottle and poured it into his mouth. At the next moment, a gentle stream of starlight flickered all over Noah's body. Under the light of the gentle starlight, Noah's cracked skin recovered at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. When the pain completely disappeared, Noah let out a big sigh of relief. He threw away the empty potion bottle in his hand and wiped his lips that were wet with the potion. "I've finally dealt with that monkey." After saying this, Noah felt that something was wrong. No, it should be said that there was something wrong. Noah reached out his hand and slightly grasped a pair of palms that had just recovered. He frowned again. My authority didn't increase? That was right. Undoubtedly, Noah had killed the great sage, heaven's equal, but he did not obtain the authority of the famous ape god. For the current Noah, the authority of the god of disobedience had become a dispensable state. Many of the noble phantasms in Noah's treasure vault had power comparable to that of a single authority. Adding one more authority would not be of much help to the current Noah. However, he did not get what he was supposed to get. No matter who it was, they would care. Unfortunately, this was not the first time Noah encountered this kind of thing. In the battle with Perseus, after Noah killed the dragon slayer hero, he did not obtain any new authority. If this situation was caused by the same reason as the previous one. Noah suddenly narrowed his eyes. He turned his hand, and a scroll made of parchment appeared in his hand. It was the magic scroll of item location. Pung. As Noah threw the scroll in his hand into the air, the scroll opened automatically, allowing the parchment full of magic squares and magic characters to unfold in the air. Then it was suddenly engulfed by the blue flames and turned into ashes. At this moment, the image that appeared in Noah's mind was a disc. It was a disc made of steel and gold. Once in Napoli, when Noah killed Perseus and chased him to Guinevere, Guinevere took it out and introduced it as such. Arrowhead disc. It stored the authority of sword god summon. It was a god relic that could summon the deceased steel, again to fight for the holder. In the past, Guinevere used this god relic to absorb Perseus' godhead, causing Noah to not obtain Perseus' authority. Noah, who had come into close contact with this god relic, now used the item location magic scroll to find the current location of the arrowhead disc. As if he was enlightened, Noah turned his head and looked at a mountain peak in the distance. A fierce light flashed in his eyes. He turned into a stream of light and rushed in the direction of the mountain peak. Oh no! At the same time, Guinevere, who was holding the arrowhead disc tightly in his hand, also exclaimed. Naturally, Guinevere could think of what Noah could think of. After killing the great sage, heaven's equal but not obtaining a new authority, Noah would definitely suspect that Guinevere was nearby. Then, as long as he used some information-type magic, it would not be difficult to find Guinevere. Just like the last time when Perseus was killed. This time, as soon as the great sage, heaven's equal, died, Guinevere encountered the danger that he was most unwilling to face, Noah. Understanding this, Guinevere could not help but tremble and shouted without hesitation. Uncle! Uncle! Please protect Guinevere. As soon as he finished speaking, with a trembling sound, the space in front of Guinevere suddenly distorted, and an illusion appeared. The illusory figure gradually solidified, and gradually became solid. In the next second, the war god, who was riding a handsome white horse, wearing pure white full-body armor, and holding a scale-shaped spear tightly in his hand, appeared. Whoosh! Almost at the same time, a stream of light suddenly shot over. It was like a meteor falling from the sky. It heavily collided with the direction where Lancelot had appeared. Dong! On the mountain peak, a violent impact was mixed with a roar that shook the sky. Like a tide, it exploded on the top of the mountain and rushed in all directions. Bang! Part of the entire mountain peak was like an erupting volcano, suddenly exploding, stirring up gravel and rocks all over the sky. Then, like a landslide, the gravel and rocks rolled all the way down the mountain, causing the whole mountain peak to tremble. Immediately on the top of the mountain, in the impact of the explosion, two figures flew out, rubbing against the air. In the whistling sound of the wind, they both stabilized their bodies in mid-air. Noah raised his head and looked at the other side of the collapsed mountain peak. There, Lancelot was riding a handsome white horse, holding Guinevere in his arms, and riding the horse in the air. On the white horse, Lancelot clenched his spear, and his whole body was surging with surging curse power. Guinevere's pretty face was pale. Holding the arrowhead disc in his arms, he was more or less in a state of shock. Just now, if Guinevere hadn't decisively summoned Lancelot, the one who suffered Noah's attack would not be Lancelot, but Guinevere. Although Guinevere was a god ancestor who surpassed human intelligence, facing Noah, who was the strongest among the god-slayers, he would be killed in an instant. In other words, without Lancelot's protection, Guinevere would have been seriously injured, even if he didn't die. How could Guinevere not be frightened? Chapter 1437. The gravel and rocks that rolled down from the top of the mountain smashed heavily at the foot of the mountain, stirring up a thick cloud of dust. The dust rose like smoke and covered the entire foot of the mountain. On both sides of the mountain peak that had exploded, Noah's and Lancelot's gazes met in midair. It was as if sparks had been ignited between them, dazzling the eyes of the onlookers. Seeing Guinevere hugging the arrowhead disc and sitting on the horse's back, protected by Lancelot's arms, Noah snorted coldly. Sure enough, it's you guys behind this again. Noah didn't have anything to be obsessed with about obtaining authority from the great sage. Firstly, there were strong and weak authorities in the first place. Who knew if the authority obtained from the great sage, heaven's equal, would be strong or weak? Secondly, compared to Noah's fusion of Welslana, Mercado, and his own power, which had the effect of self-enhancement, the authority of the god-slayer and the god of disobedience were much weaker than before. In addition, Noah could use the fusion of his avatars, so he had a clear path of improvement. Adding one or two ordinary authorities was simply dispensable. Thirdly, in Noah's treasure vault, there were also many relics that could be comparable to authorities. In this way, Noah naturally wouldn't be obsessed with obtaining authority. However, that didn't mean that Noah wouldn't care about being manipulated in the dark. Not to mention, it was someone who had done it once. I let you guys go last time, but I didn't expect that this time. You guys still have the face to continue scheming against me? Noah's lips curled into a somewhat mocking smile. Don't tell me you guys really think that I don't have a temper? With that said, a vast curse power expanded from Noah's body little by little, as if an invisible flame was burning little by little, causing the surrounding air to appear in a state of distortion. Sensing the terrifying curse power gradually swelling from Noah's body, Guinevere, who had yet to recover from his shock, was jolted awake. Lancelot's grip on his spear also tightened slightly. For Guinevere and Lancelot, only about a month had passed since the dispute in Nabali. In Guinevere and Lancelot's memories, Noah's curse power was definitely not as terrifying as it was now. But that was to be expected. Compared to that time, Noah had already been reborn. Not only had his authority evolved and strengthened several times, but he had also developed the ability to use multiple clones at the same time. Not only did he obtain a treasure vault that contained all the treasures that only existed in myths and legends since ancient times, but he also obtained the grace bestowed by God and obtained ability points. Even the originally limited energy had become a bottomless pit, no longer having a limit. In addition to the strengthening of the Leo's solar sovereignty of the 12 zodiac signs, and the dragon's solar sovereignty of the 12 equatorial stars, even without using his authority, the current Noah was more powerful than Guinevere, and Lancelot remembered him to be a month ago. Under such circumstances, even the battle-thirsty Lancelot had to be cautious, let alone Guinevere, who was a little afraid of Noah. Guinevere could only hug the arrowhead disc tightly and look at the two ancient sword-shaped words imprinted on it. He forced himself to calm down, bit his lip, and said in a somewhat resentful tone, "Didn't Master Noah also snatch the god relic that belonged to Guinevere from him? The Holy Grail is more important than any authority to Guinevere. So, you're planning to pay me back?" Noah smiled sarcastically. "But I remember that before this, you should have used the arrowhead disc to snatch Perseus. The debt between you and me should have been settled at that time. Now that you've snatched the Monkey King, what are you going to use to pay off the debt?" Unfortunately, there's nothing on Guinevere that can catch Master Noah's eye. Guinevere mustered his courage. "However, if you're willing to return the Holy Grail to Guinevere, I'm willing to listen to any conditions you have." As the rightful heir of the Holy Grail, Guinevere could summon the Holy Grail back even if it left his side. However, due to the fact that the Holy Grail used to host the world fragment, Guinevere could not summon the Holy Grail that fell into Noah's hands under the influence of the world fragment. In other words, at this time when the world fragment had left the Holy Grail, Guinevere could actually summon the Holy Grail back at any time. Unfortunately, the Holy Grail was now sleeping in Noah's Gate of Babylon. It was stored in a space that belonged solely to Noah. Therefore, Guinevere could not sense the Holy Grail. Similarly, Guinevere could not summon the Holy Grail back, unless Noah took the Holy Grail out of his treasure vault and let it see the light of day again. In that case, Guinevere could summon the Holy Grail back at any time. Guinevere, who did not know this, thought that the Holy Grail was still in Noah's control. Therefore, Guinevere, who had always wanted to get the Holy Grail back, proposed such a deal. However, that did not move Noah at all. "You're only saying this now?" Noah said with a smile that was not a smile. "Don't you think it's too late?" As soon as he finished speaking, Noah's body tensed up, and the curse power in his body suddenly erupted. Lancelot and Guinevere were shocked at the same time. "My beloved daughter, in my current state, I'm no match for the God Slayer," Lancelot suddenly said. "So, now is the time to use the god relic left by our Lord and summon the deceased sword god to fight for us." "I understand, uncle." Guinevere bit his lips and raised the arrowhead disc. "Now that things have come to this, we can only combine the power of the 3 steel heroes to fight the God Slayer in front of us." "Is that so?" Noah laughed coldly. "Very well, anyway, I'm very angry today, so no matter how many of you come, I'll take them all." Just as Noah was about to charge in Lancelot's direction, and Guinevere was about to use the arrowhead disc to summon the 2 steel heroes, a burst of bright flower petals suddenly flashed between the 2 sides. Along with the petals dancing in the air, a peerless heroine appeared from the petals. The appearance of his figure caused the tense atmosphere that was on the verge of erupting to turn sluggish. Immediately, the beautiful woman who appeared from the petals directly faced Noah, exposing her back to Guinevere and Lancelot. She lightly opened her red lips with a somewhat angry tone. "King of Rakshasa of a foreign country, how dare you ignore the existence of Luo Hao and leave the battlefield on your own? This is a great disrespect, and it goes against the demeanor of an indomitable king." Who else could it be other than the arrogant Luo Hao who suddenly barged in like there was no one else around? This peerless king of Wuxia did not seem to have Lancelot and Guinevere in her eyes at all. She only looked straight at Noah, her eyes full of anger. There was nothing she could do about it. After Noah defeated the great sage, heaven's equal, Luo Hao became competitive with Noah and really regarded Noah as a strong opponent. Under such circumstances, driven by Luo Hao's high fighting spirit, he was preparing to challenge Noah openly as a martialist. Who knew that while waiting, Noah suddenly left Luo Hao and ran to find Lancelot and Guinevere. At that time, Luo Hao was stunned. After she reacted, Luo Hao's heart was filled with anger. The dignified leader of the martial arts world of China, the king of Wuxia, when had she been ignored like this? Not to mention, Luo Hao had already regarded Noah as a strong opponent. As a result, this strong opponent ignored Luo Hao. For Luo Hao, who thought highly of herself, this was even more unbearable. "King Noah, I Luo Zuilian now officially challenge you." Luo Hao stared at Noah with eyes full of anger. "Today there must be a winner between you and me." Chapter 1438. When Luo Hao's angry voice resounded throughout the sky, the reactions of the people present were completely different. Lancelot was wearing a helmet, so no one could see his expression. However, the hand that was holding the spear slowly relaxed. Guinevere was startled at first, then his eyes rolled, and his expression began to relax. Only Noah, who was suddenly entangled by this unexpected trouble, Luo Hao, felt the anger in his heart rising all of a sudden. "I haven't settled accounts with you yet, and you're actually going to ruin my plans again." "Settle accounts?" The anger in Luo Hao's eyes seemed to grow stronger. "I, Luo Hao, am worthy of the heavens above and my parents below. I have never owed anyone anything. Noah King, this is an insult to me. I don't want to waste my time talking to you here." Noah raised his voice involuntarily. "I don't have time to deal with you now. Get out of my way. I'm not looking for you." Hearing Noah's words, Luo Hao naturally became angrier. However, Luo Hao still understood Noah's words. To put it simply, Noah was not interested in Luo Hao, but wanted to find the god ancestor and the shadow of God, who were ignored by Luo Hao. Although Luo Hao did not take the god ancestor seriously at all, let alone Lancelot, the shadow of God, it was precisely because of this that Noah's words made Luo Hao angrier and angrier. The existence that Luo Hao regarded as a strong opponent would rather ignore Luo Hao and focus more attention on the people that Luo Hao ignored. How could Luo Hao not become angrier and angrier? Luo Hao really could not remember how long it had been since he was so angry. If it was an ordinary person, Luo Hao would have already blasted him to pieces without saying a word. However, Luo Hao now regarded Noah as a strong opponent and naturally only wanted to defeat Noah in a fair challenge. Luo Hao turned his head and cast an extremely cold gaze at Guinevere and Lancelot. "Are you going to stop me, Luo Hao?" With such a sentence, the aura of the unparalleled king of Wuxia instantly locked on Guinevere and Lancelot. In response, Guinevere's body stiffened while Lancelot spoke calmly. "God Slayer of the land of China, you have misunderstood. I have absolutely no intention of violating the sacred duel. It's just as Uncle said, sect leader." Guinevere also reacted and smiled. The duel between the hierarch and Lord Noah, Guinevere definitely doesn't have the intention to disturb. "Since that's the case, you can all leave," Luo Hao said in an unquestionable tone. "If you leave now, I can still forgive your sins and not pursue your gains and losses." Luo Hao's words made Guinevere overjoyed. "In that case, Guinevere will take his leave," Guinevere hurriedly said. "Uncle, I know what to do," Lancelot said regretfully. "Although it's a pity to miss the duel with the two unparalleled god slayers, I'm just a shadow now. It's my duty to protect my beloved daughter, so I'll leave for the time being." After speaking, Lancelot squeezed the back of the white horse, making the white horse let out a long neigh. "You want to leave?" Noah's eyes sharpened. "How can it be that easy?" As soon as he finished speaking, Noah's figure turned into an arrow that left the string and shot out violently, rushing in the direction of Lancelot and Guinevere. However, this move made Luo Hao, who was already furious, even angrier. "King Noah, your opponent is me." Luo Hao flicked her sleeves and stepped on the air like a fairy descending from the sky. The feathers on her Han costume fluttered in the wind. Her delicate body turned and suddenly disappeared. When she reappeared, she was already in front of Noah, who was rushing in the direction of Lancelot and Guinevere. Just like Europe had magic, and the Far East had spells such as yin and yang, the land of China also had its own spells. That kind of spell was called the art of divination, which was the so-called magic. Right now, what Luo Hao was using was a technique known as the divine ground shrinking technique, also known as the divine feat. Using this kind of art of divination, even ordinary people could achieve unparalleled speed. As the king of martial arts, who was the best in the world in the land of China, Luo Hao used this kind of art of divination to achieve the effect of teleportation. As long as Luo Hao was willing, basically, Luo Hao could reach any country in an instant with the divine footwork. Last time, in Italy, in the battle with Noah, Luo Hao had also used this kind of art of divination. Now Luo Hao once again used such a mysterious art of divination. "King Noah, take my palm." Facing Noah, who was rushing towards him, Luo Hao almost used the power of the Vajra divine art at the first time. With a supreme power, he struck a palm at Noah. This palm crushed all the air in the place where it passed, causing an extremely strong sonic boom. However, in the face of this palm, Noah completely ignored it, as if he intended to directly use his body to block the palm attack that could split mountains and rocks, and rushed straight up. This surprised Luo Hao, and he couldn't help but restrain the strength in his hand a little, making the palm slow down. At this moment, Noah suddenly flashed and his figure drew a perfect arc, directly passing Luo Hao, and rushed in the direction of Lancelot and Guinevere without slowing down. Seeing this, Guinevere couldn't help but be shocked. "Uncle." Suddenly, Lancelot tightened the reins in his hand without any hesitation, causing the majestic white horse's limbs to stomp heavily in the air. Like a bullet fired from a barrel, it retreated violently. However, Noah, who was rushing in the direction of Lancelot, suddenly trembled, and his speed suddenly increased by several degrees. He turned into a bolt of lightning and swept straight out. Clang! In Noah's hand, a burst of brilliant white light suddenly appeared, turning into a silver holy sword that flashed in the air. Holding the silver holy sword, Noah turned into a bolt of lightning, cut through the air, and flew in front of Lancelot, who was retreating violently. Lancelot's body trembled, and he almost reflexively clenched the inversed scales spear in his hand, and stabbed heavily at Noah, who was flying in front of him. However, in the next moment, a scene that shocked Lancelot appeared. Clang! Accompanied by the sound of metal clashing, the sharp long spear pierced fiercely into Noah's heart, creating a series of sparks. It was as if the long spear had collided with hard steel. It did not even pierce through an inch of Noah's skin. Ultimate sword skill. Primary form purple lightning. The holy sword, which was shining with brilliant white light, suddenly intersected with the sharp spear, cutting through the air, and violently piercing toward Lancelot's chest. Poochie! The silver holy sword penetrated Lancelot's heavy armor, pierced through Lancelot's body, and came out of Lancelot's back, bringing with it a burst of blood. Uncle! Guinevere's face was filled with horror. However, Lancelot had no time to respond to Guinevere. This was because Noah, who was flying in front of him, suddenly let go of the sword in his hand, turned around, and kicked Lancelot's body with a strong and powerful kick. Bang! In the muffled sound, Lancelot, who was holding Guinevere in his arms, was directly kicked away by a kick. He flew out from the horse's back, rubbing against the air. Like a kite with a broken string, he fell from the air. It didn't take long for Lancelot and Guinevere's figures to disappear between the mountains, and no one knew where they fell to. The majestic white horse immediately dissipated like mist, disappearing without a trace. Noah lowered his head and looked in the direction where Lancelot and Guinevere disappeared. Just as he was about to dive down, a violent spell vibrated in the air. A fierce gust of wind suddenly shook, like a storm, rushing in the direction of Noah. Noah's figure stagnated, and he took a deep breath. Do you really think I'm a sick cat if I don't show my power? With a flip of his hand, a gorgeous scabbard appeared in Noah's hand. Bloom. An ideal place away from the mortal world. Avalon. The gorgeous scabbard bloomed with bright light, turning into a crystal-like barrier, covering Noah's body. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.